Balus walked along the dusty road that led to the village, his heavy hammer resting on his right shoulder. His armor, scratched by years of fighting, creaked with every step. In his bag he had 50 pieces of silver, enough for a week of wine and meat, but not enough to afford idleness. The village was visible in the distance, a mix of wooden and earthen houses, with thatched roofs and thick smoke rising lazily from the houses. The smell of baked bread mixed with that of manure and sweat. A heavy but familiar air for a village on the edge of the Dacian Empire. People moved slowly, but their eyes stopped on him. A massive, bald stranger with cold eyes and a hammer the size of a child. Balus paid them no attention. He was looking for work. Something simple. The tavern seemed the right place to start. He headed for the tavern, a low building with a cracked door from which came the murmur of voices and hoarse laughter. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, the wood creaking, and stepped inside. The air was thick, full of smoke from the hearth fire and the smell of sour wine. A few villagers stopped talking, watching him. Balus sat down at a table in the corner, his hammer resting against a chair with a dull thud. The innkeeper, a stocky man with arms tattooed with ancient Dacian symbols, approached, wiping a mug. Innkeeper: "Stranger, what brings you to this forgotten village? Wine or food?" Balus: "I come to clear the dust from my throat. And work." The innkeeper poured the wine into a cracked mug, looking at him carefully. "For business. You've come to the right place. Duras came earlier and said he wanted some boys to build a fence." Balus sipped the wine, sour but good. "Duras? Where can I find this one? What does he look like?" The innkeeper leaned over the table, his voice dropping. "Duras is our old man, a former general in the Empire's army. Tall, with scars on his face, a grey beard, he wears an old sheepskin coat with Dacian insignia. You'll find him at the council, near the temple. The building with the red roof. Go now, he's there with the priest." Balus nodded, finishing his wine. "Okay. How much does this mug cost?" Innkeeper: 5 silver. Balus took 5 silver pieces out of his bag, throwing them on the table. He stood, hammer on his shoulder, and walked out of the tavern, heading for the temple. Balus pushed open the door of the red-roofed building, the old wood creaking under the weight of his massive shoulder. Inside, the air was cool, with a faint smell of burnt herbs and old leather. Duras sat at a simple wooden table, bent over a worn map, his staff propped beside him. The old man looked up, the scars on his face deepening in the dim light of a torch. The priest, a thin man in a robe embroidered with Dacian spirals, stood in the background silently leafing through an ancient book, but did not intervene. "Duras, what can I do for you, young man?" "I haven't seen you around the village." Balus approached, his hammer resting against the wall with a dull thud. The wound on his left leg, a bad fall into a ditch in the previous village after a night of drinking, saw him, but he walked normally, gritting his teeth to keep from showing weakness. Balus: "I heard you have work to do." Duras nodded, straightening his back with a groan. "That's right." A storm knocked a tree over the fence of the temple, the building opposite. "It needs to be repaired quickly before animals or thieves get in. We're few men here, most of them conscripted into the army. I'll give you 25 silver for a day's work, plus 15 at the end." Balus: "Okay. When do we start?" Duras: "Tomorrow at sunrise at the temple. Bring your hammer, we'll need the strength." Balus nodded and left, heading back toward the tavern. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the houses. He pushed open the tavern door again, the thick air welcoming him like an old friend. He sat down at the same corner table, the hammer beside him. The innkeeper approached quickly. Innkeeper. Back so soon? How did it go with Duras? Balus. I have a contract. Give me a wine and a steak. The good kind, not leftovers. The next day at sunrise, Balus arrived at the temple, limping slightly on the dew-damp path. The wound in his leg bothered him after the long journey, but he ignored it. Duras was already there, with 2 frail old villagers. By the broken fence, a massive tree had fallen on it, shattering the wooden posts. Duras. Welcome. Let's begin. Lift the tree, then repair it. You, with your strength, take that end. Balus nodded, grabbed the trunk with his massive arms, and lifted it himself, his muscles straining. The others helped him move it, but he did the bulk of the work. They worked quickly. Balus hammered in new posts with a hammer, tied the fence with thick ropes, finishing in half a day what Duras had expected would take all day. Duras wiped the sweat from his forehead, admiringly. You finished faster than I expected. You're good at this. Why aren't you in the army? The Empire is recruiting all able-bodied men for the war in the north. My sources tell me they're preparing for a new campaign against the Goths. Balus paused, leaning on his hammer reluctantly. He didn't like to talk about the past. Balus. It's none of your business, Duras insisted, his voice low. Come on, man. You look like someone who could lead a platoon. Why didn't you join up? Balus sighed, pointing to his left leg, where an ugly scar showed through his torn trousers. I fought in the last war against the Goths, which the Empire won. I was honorably discharged for my heroism. This wound took me out of the fight. But I can still work. Duras nodded in understanding. Then you're just the kind of man we need around here. Keep your pay, and if you want any more work, come to me. After taking his pay, Balus returned to the tavern, limping slightly down the dusty road. The pain in his leg was gnawing at him from the effort with the fence, but he walked normally, gritting his teeth. He pushed open the door and sat down at the table in the corner, his hammer resting against the chair. The innkeeper approached, wiping a mug. How was the work? You look tired, Balus. Good. Have you heard of any contracts? The innkeeper shook his head negatively. There's not much work to do now, with the village empty. Most of the men are away in the army. But if I hear anything, I'll tell you. Balus nodded and ordered wine and steak. He ate quickly, savouring the meat, then drank wine after wine, feeling the alcohol numb his pain. His head became heavy. The voices in the tavern faded. He fell asleep at the table, his head on his arms. Night fell heavily over the village, shadows sliding across the wooden houses. Beneath the cold earth of a crypt, hidden in the forest, a dark magic pulsed, awakening the ghoul. He rose, a spectral figure with glowing red eyes, driven by an old, burning hunger. A faint scent of dried herbs of the cursed family drew him in. He was not his first victim, but he felt a strange connection to them. He crept outside, moving like a living shadow, eyeing Mariora. The old woman had come out at night, hesitantly, with an empty bucket in her hand. The air suddenly cooled, and a guttural growl, followed by a short squeal, came from her throat. An inhuman sound that shook the village. Then the old hag opened her mouth to scream, but her voice was lost, drowned in terror. The ghoul grabbed her, its claws digging into her fragile arm. Its mouth closed around her neck, sucking her blood and life, and bits of her memories. It took it all, leaving her empty. In the remaining blood, it drew a forbidden and profane symbol with its claws, glowing faintly before fading. A magical seal, the mark of its curse. The ground beneath her burned gently, and her body collapsed, dry, its veins empty. The ghoul felt a moment of uncertainty, wanting to seek more lives, to feed its unquenchable hunger. But the call of the crypts pulled him back, like an invisible rope. And the rising sun, a thread of light on the horizon, burned him, forcing him to retreat into the shadows. The hunger remained, but for now, the village was safe. Around her, the ground seemed scorched, and a few birds just descend curiously, but they don't touch her body. The villagers whisper among themselves, "It's the work of the ghoul. Poor Mariowara, why did she leave the house at night? Cursed be this ghoul. Who's next now?" Duras comes limping from his house, his staff leaning on his shoulder. His gaze is heavy, and his eyes blur when he sees the victim. In his soul, he knows that this cannot continue. He approaches slowly, and the crowd makes way for him, silent. Duras, poor Mariowara. She was like a sister to me. But why did you go out, woman, when you knew that the wretched ghoul walks at night? He turns to the crowd. How many times have I told you not to let the sacred fires go out at night? How many times have I told you to stay indoors? Look what's happened. His gaze hardens. But we can't live in fear. Enough. This ghoul has sucked the life out of us, literally and figuratively. We have to do something. A villager in the crowd replies, "And what can we do, Duras? Who can face a ghoul? We're just peasants." Duras says firmly, "Not us. But I know a man who can. There's a mercenary at the tavern. I saw him yesterday. I could convince him, if we had enough silver to pay him." The crowd begins to murmur. Some villagers seem to agree, others are skeptical. But these mercenaries don't do anything without money. What if they take our money and leave? What if the ghoul is too powerful even for him? Duras raises his hand to stop them. "I know we're poor, but it's better to give what we have than to all perish. Leave it to me. I'll convince him to help us." Duras leans over the old woman's body and whispers, "Mariowara, I promise I'll do justice." Then he gets up, straightens his back resolutely, and slowly walks towards the tavern. The inn is small and dark, with solid wooden walls and smoke-stained beams. A fire smoulders in a large hearth, casting shadows on the walls. The smell of mulled wine and roasting meat fills the air. A few silent villagers sit at the tables, muttering to themselves. No one laughs, no one sings. Fear hangs in the air. Balus sits alone at a table, a large goblet of wine in his hand, and a steak. His heavy hammer is propped against the table, almost like a warning. He drinks slowly, thoughtfully, ignoring the curious glances of the villagers. Mercenaries like him are not a common sight in such villages. The inn door creaks open, and Duras appears in the doorway. The cold air and fog creep in with him. The villagers are silent. Some make protective signs. Others look at the ground. Duras shakes off the dampness of his cloak, rests his staff on the floor, and looks directly at Balus. Without hesitation, he steps towards him. "Duras, you are the man we need." Balus looks up, sizes up the old man in one glance, and takes a sip of wine. "It depends. How much are you paying me, old man?" Duras takes out a small bag of silver and places it on the table. "Not much, but it's all we have." Balus touches the bag with his fingers, weighs it in his palm, estimating it to be 100 silver, then sits back, looking disinterested. "Kill a wolf? A bandit? What does this village want from me? Duras, a ghoul. At that moment, the inn becomes even quieter. Even the fire seems to crackle more softly. The tavern is quiet. Only a few scattered murmurs can be heard from the tables in the corner. Balus finishes his wine, and Duras watches his every move. Duras, the last dead person, is Mariora. I found her pale as lime, breathless, with her eyes wide open. Not a drop of blood in her. And this isn't the first. Balus puts down his glass, runs his tongue over his teeth, and looks deep into Duras's eyes. A barely visible smile forms at the corner of his mouth. A ghoul, you say, old man? Tell me more. Where was the murder? Duras. In the center of the village, by the fountain. Duras pulls up a chair and sits down. The inn remains silent, and the dancing shadows of the fire seem to hide more secrets than before. Balus. And what do you want from me? Kill a ghoul? Duras. The undead was once human, and if that's what we believe, it must be stopped before it kills anyone else. Balus. What do you mean, once human? Duras. Ghouls are no ordinary undead. Sometimes a dead person rises from the grave if their soul hasn't completely departed. Or if they've been cursed. They feed on the living until there's none left, Balus. And how do you expect me to hunt them down? Call them by name and tell them to stay put? Duras. They say they fear holy things. Maybe we'll find answers in the temple or with the wise man. Balus. Thinks, then takes the bag of silver and weighs it in his palm again. Okay. One more night in your shitty village, and I'll find out if it's a ghoul or just a murderer lurking in the shadows. Balus. And when did the attacks start? Duras. The first was Ileana, last week. Then the villagers reported other strange things around the village. Balus. Where is the woman's body now? Duras. The villagers took her body to the mill until the gravediggers came to take her. Duras watches Balus pick up the wine mug and tip it over his head. Balus smiles. That's how a good day starts. Duras pulls his coat tighter around him, preparing to leave. Balus. If I have any more questions or finish the contract, where can I find you, old man? Duras. I'm usually at the council or at the temple. If I'm not there, it means it's my turn. The silence hung heavy over the village. A few villagers stepped aside to let the mercenary pass as he made his way toward the barn where Mariora's body was being kept. The old wood creaked under the wind, and an old woman, the miller's wife, met him at the entrance. Maria, voice trembling, making a sign of protection. I wouldn't want to go in again. She's been there for 2 hours. Her eyes won't close. This curse will haunt us all. Balus, running his hand over his beard, bored. Open the door, old hag. Maria stepped back, muttering something under her breath about evil spirits. And Balus pushed open the barn door. A cold draught hit his face, and the smell of death and stale flesh struck him full force. Light filtered weakly through the barn's planks. On a bed of straw, Mariora's body lay rigid. Her skin was drawn tight over her bones, pale as wax. The village shaman stood beside her, a thin man in a worn robe, shaking his head. Shaman. This is how she was found at dawn. Balus approached, knelt beside her, and examined her. He gently lifted her neck, inspecting the bite mark. Balus. This looks like a bite, but it could also be a stab with something sharp. No other signs of a struggle. And this symbol, carved on her chest. Village healer. Nothing. No wounds on her hands. She didn't try to defend herself, as if she didn't even have time to scream. Balus, clenching his jaw. Where did you say she was discovered? Village healer. In the center of the village, by the well. Balus ran his fingers over his forehead, then stood up, sighing. As he exited the barn, he bumped into Giannina, the miller's daughter, a young woman with black hair tied back, standing lost in space by the door, her arms crossed. Balus, looking at her, noticing her vacant expression. "What's wrong with you, wench? You look like you've seen a ghost." Giannina, startling, then lowering her voice. "More than a ghost. Mariuara came last night into our kitchen. She was shaking all over. She told me she felt like someone was following her, that she saw shadows. I told her it was madness, but maybe it wasn't." She stops abruptly, touches her forehead and chest with 2 fingers, then knocks 3 times on the wooden door. A superstitious gesture meant to ward off evil spirits. "Zalmoxes, protect me from the shadows of the dead and their curses." Giannina, hesitating, then whispering. She kept looking toward the road, as if she was waiting for someone, or afraid they were coming, and her old sins. Some say the ghoul targets women like her and Ileana with the village gossip. When I closed the door, I heard footsteps outside. But when I went out, no one. Just the wind and a strange laugh, like a soulless man. Balus, rolling his eyes but noting it down. "So a ghost and a laugh. Good. Anything else?" Giannina disappeared into the house, leaving Balus with his thoughts. Balus continued on his way, analysing what he'd learned, and headed toward the well, the crime scene. The sun was high, casting short shadows on the dry gravel. He inspected the area where Mariuara's body had been found, crouching down, rubbing the scorched earth and looking for traces. Some deep scratches on the stone, like claw marks, and a strange symbol carved into the gravel with dried blood only in the lines, nothing else scattered around. Just then, Ion, a young lad with his sleeves rolled up and a troubled look, approached hesitantly, trying to seem brave. "Ion, what are you doing here, stranger? Looking for something specific?" Balus, "Investigating Mariuara's crime. Know anything about what happened here?" Ion, "I found her this morning. I wasn't alone, but I saw her first." Balus, "Tell me what you saw, lad." Ion sighed and ran a hand through his hair, his gaze lost, as if the memory still weighed on him. Ion, "It was dawn, just breaking, with a light fog over the village. I went to the well to fetch water for the house and saw Mariuara there, on the ground, on the pavement. She was cold to the touch, stiff as a board, with her eyes wide open, like she was staring at something only she could see." Balus listened silently, his eyes fixed on the symbol in the ground. Ion, on her chest was a carved mark, on her neck an ugly bite, like from a beast, but clean, no blood. And the symbol, that one on the pavement, seemed to glow faintly in the dawn light. I swear I saw it fade when the sun rose. Balus, where was the body relative to the symbol? Did it look arranged? Ion, her head was facing east, by the well. The symbol a step away from her, like it had been drawn specially there, next to the body. It didn't seem random, but who knows? Balus, did you know her? Ion, not too well. She was older, but rumors say she was wealthy, with hidden silver, an old family inheritance. She had a stepdaughter and a sister, Geta. Maybe they can tell you more. Balus, seen anything else? Ion, it seemed like she blinked when we lifted her to take her to the miller. Just a short moment, like there was still life in her. Maybe I saw wrong, but it shook me. Balus, drink anything last night? Or this morning? Ion, yeah, I drank with the rest of the boys in the village. We're too young to be recruited into the army, so we hang around and drink to pass the time. But I wasn't drunk, I swear. Balus said nothing, He just gave him a short look, and Ion fidgeted, muttering a hasty goodbye before retreating. The mercenary bent down again, analysing the symbol and the claw marks on the pavement. After questioning a few villagers about moving Mariora's body and hearing confused accounts about last night, Balus felt the need to fix his findings. With his hammer on his shoulder, he headed toward the village square, where the stalls were full of fresh vegetables, dried herbs, and colourful fabrics. The vendors and housewives moved lazily, but their gazes stopped curiously and suspiciously on the massive stranger. A faint murmur filled the air, especially from the elders gathered at the edge, who spat discreetly or made signs of protection. Balus stopped at a modest stall where a merchant was arranging some cloth. "Balus, give me a parchment and something to draw with. I need to put down what I've seen." Merchant: 10 silver.
Balus pulled 10 silver from his pouch, tossed them to the merchant, and took the offered parchment along with a stub of charcoal. He smoothed the paper on the edge of the stall and began to draw the symbol seen at the well, trying to recreate the details as faithfully as possible, though he didn't know if it was oriented in a particular direction. It was the first time he'd seen something like that. He was just sketching the curved lines when Babadocia, a hunched old hag with a dirty headscarf tied tightly on her head, passed by him. Her small, piercing eyes stopped on the drawing, and her lips tightened into a contemptuous smile. "Babadocia, look what the wind brought us." A mercenary with a hammer, scribbling the sign of death like a drunken priest. "What are you doing with that soulless stranger without shame? Bringing curses over our village." Balus raised his gaze, unmoved by her harsh tone. "Balus, better to scribble than sit like a dried-up old hag with a tongue full of bile. It's just a drawing. Your old mind sees curses everywhere." Babadocia: "Shut up, you scoundrel. I've seen that sign before, 20 years ago, on the hand of a priest who disappeared without a trace, leaving curses behind. The cursed Goths brought this misfortune, and Mariora paid with her blood for their sins. You're not worthy to play with that." Balus narrowed his eyes, stepping closer, his voice becoming harsher, but controlled. "Balus, if you're sticking your nose where it doesn't boil, say it clear, hag. What you know about the sign and the Goths, or the gravediggers will dig a grave for you too." The old hag spat at his feet and raised her trembling hand as if to ward him off. "Babadocia, cursed be you, mongrel without kin. It's the sign of the cursed priest. The Goths brought black magic, and now it haunts us. Ask those who still tremble at night, if you dare." Babadocia, muttering, "May the shadows take you, stranger. Zalmoxe, protect us from you." A woman pulled her child closer. An old man spat in the dust, and the murmur grew like a spreading disease. "The stranger brings trouble," said a voice from the crowd. Balus took his parchment and hammer, passing through them without haste. The gazes followed him, full of hate and fear, but he paid them no mind. Babadocia watched him with venomous eyes until he left the square. After escaping the shameless old hag from the square, Balus headed toward the old village cemetery, drawn by the shadow of death that seemed to extend its claws over the village, seeking traces of a dead one who couldn't find rest. The air was heavy with damp earth and rotting roots, and the path snaked among simple earthen mounds, some covered with massive stones, others marked with carved wooden totems, chiseled with runes that kept the souls of the departed. He stopped abruptly In front of him, in the pale afternoon light, someone was moving a large funerary stone, pushing it aside from a freshly disturbed mound. It was a thin man, dressed in rags, with a cloth pouch at his belt and a short dagger at his side. With hands dirty from earth, he was rummaging in a rotting wooden coffin, pulling out old coins and a massive gold ring. "Balus, hard work, huh? May it be in a good hour?" The thief jumped and drew his knife, standing up. "Thief, who's there?" "Balus, the one asking what the hell you're looking for in coffins, you human scum." The thief clenched his jaws and gripped the pouch in his hand. "Thief, none of your business." "Balus, it is because I want to know if I'm dealing with a ghoul or just a mongrel who steals from the dead." Without thinking, the thief grabbed a handful of ash from the coffin and threw it in Balus's face. The mercenary dodged, but enough dust got in his eyes to delay him a second. When he looked up, the thief was already slipping through the forest thicket, running with the agility of a fox. "Balus, in the end, you're just a rat." He turned to leave, but then he felt something, a cold shiver on his neck. He turned back. The open earthen mound seemed to have moved. In the pale light, he saw deep claw marks on the coffin lid, as if the one buried had tried to get out. For the first time that day, Balus felt a trace of unease. Balus looked in the direction where the thief had disappeared. No point chasing him through the woods. It would be like running after a fox among burrows. But he'd find him later in the village. Turning back to the cemetery, he decided it was time to search better. If a scoundrel was rummaging through graves, it meant he might find something worth taking too. He wandered among the earthen mounds, noticing that several had been disturbed. Some seemed to have been merely trodden by someone moving in haste. Others had their funerary stones shifted. At an old grave, the stone had been shattered in two, and the earth beneath was bulging as if someone had tried to get out. Balus bent down, pushing aside chunks of stone. Beneath them, amid remnants of rotted wood, he spotted a dagger with a black blade. He pulled it out and held it in the dim light. It was an ancient object, but perfectly balanced in his hand, with unfamiliar symbols etched on the blade. Balus, nice piece, and strange. He twirled it between his fingers. It didn't seem used in battle, but rather in rituals. The hilt was carved with the face of a wolf, with hollow eyes. He tucked it into his belt and continued searching. On a more distant funerary stone, someone had recently scratched a symbol different from the Dacian ones. A circle pierced by a vertical line, resembling an open wound. His gaze fell on scattered bones. Among them, he spotted a piece of metal darkened by time. He reached in among the remains and pulled out a heavy copper ring, engraved with ancient, nearly faded signs. A strange sensation ran through his palm when he touched it. It felt warm, as if someone had just worn it. He held it up to his eye, weighing it in his hand. Balus, cursed maybe? Or just my luck? He slipped it onto his index finger and turned to leave. At that moment, a raven croaked sharply from the top of a funerary totem. The mercenary shot it a piercing look. The bird spread its black wings and flew toward the forest. He glanced around. A heavy silence hung in the air. The wind had stopped. Not even the tree leaves stirred anymore. Then a long shadow slithered among the graves. Balus clenched his fist on his hammer, but when he looked closer, there was nothing there. After exploring the cemetery for a while, he found a funerary stone with foreign symbols. He ran his palm over the scratched symbol. It wasn't Dacian. It resembled nothing he knew. He gritted his teeth and raised his hammer without hesitation. Balus, your curses have no place on Dacian soil, you filth. The blow fell heavy, shattering the stone into pieces. A muffled echo spread through the cemetery, as if the earth itself sighed. Balus paid no mind. He blew over the hammer to shake off the dust and spat into the desecrated grave. Balus, let's see what powers you have now, you vipers. He took one last step back, casting a final glance over the cemetery. It was time to return to the village and ask Duras what he knew about all this, and maybe run into the village priest too. If anyone knew about cursed things, it had to be him. At the temple, the Dacian temple dominated the village like a chunk of mountain cut, and brought among the people. The walls were covered in bas reliefs of wolves, dragons, and eyes carved into the stone, each seeming to watch the one who dared enter, judging them. Balus climbed the steps. It was the first time he'd set foot in a holy place. He had no business with gods, but the pouch at his belt was getting lighter, and Duras was the type of man who paid only when he saw results. A young servant girl jumped when she saw him. She looked at him with wide eyes, like a sheep sensing the wolf nearby. Servant girl, with what can I help you, master? Balus, looking for the priest. Servant girl, he's busy with old man Duras. Balus, perfect. I have news that interests them both. The girl swallowed hard, and without another word led him down a narrow corridor paved with glossy stone slabs. On the way, Balus glanced over a table full of offerings. In the middle, a large silver goblet gleamed under the flame of a candle. He reached out and touched it with his fingers. Fine runes flowed like snakes carved in living metal. The water inside trembled slightly, though the air was still. A flash crossed his mind that such a goblet would be worth a fortune, but he curbed the instinct. It wasn't the time. The girl opened a heavy stone door for him. They entered unnoticed, and Duras's grave voice echoed, "Duras, I've told you before, father. Since the men left for war, the village is going down the drain. Houses abandoned, fields unplowed. The women don't even come to festivals anymore. They say Zalmoxe has forsaken them. Priest, Zalmoxe forsakes no one, Duras. People forsake themselves when they forget to pray. Duras, they pray from hunger, father, not for salvation. When you have no man in the house and the child asks for bread, what prayer do you say? That your belly isn't empty, but your soul is full? Priest, faith isn't about bellies, it's about the heart. I admit, times have changed. Since I came to the village, the temple's chest has emptied slowly. Women bring flowers instead of silver, men are absent, and merchants pass rarely. Zalmoxe demands sacrifice, but without silver, even the candles don't light themselves. Duras, frowning. So Zalmoxe needs payment too, huh? Priest, don't twist my words. I don't ask for myself. I keep the flame alive, otherwise the village fades. Duras, the village has already faded. Father, look around. Raises his staff, pointing to the stone window. When I left, with the army, there were 100 able-bodied men. Now there are 10 old men and a handful of wenches. Fences falling, grains rotting, and you shine in your gold-embroidered shirt. Priest, ironic. Would you have me preach in rags? So people think the temple is poor and their god has lost power. The shine is all that's left for them. If the temple falls, hope falls too. Duras. Hope isn't bought with gold, father. It's earned with justice and work. He leans heavily on his staff. But what do you know of work? When I was in the north, I saw men dying for the Empire, not for the gods. I learned that the fist keeps the world straight, not prayer. Priest, that's how a tired man speaks, not a wise one. Duras, maybe. But I've built fences and buried comrades. You've built statues and buried silver. Priest, without the temple, your village would be just a cluster of hovels and sins. People fear the dark, Duras. I give them light, Duras. No, you sell light for heavy coin. Priest staring at him. Someone has to keep order. When Zalmoxe is silent, we still have to speak in his place. Duras. And when he speaks, do you still remember what his voice sounds like? Balus. Honorable men. I don't want to spoil your talk, but I have some news worth hearing. The priest, a man of about 50, in leather pants and a shirt embroidered with gold thread, covered in Zalmoxian symbols, motioned him to come closer, scrutinizing him as if sensing the stranger brought trouble. Duras raised his gaze, still frowning. Duras, you came quick, mercenary. Tell us what you've found. Balus pulled a crumpled parchment from his pocket and spread it over the stone table. The yellow light of the lamp swayed over the blackened lines, and the air in the room seemed to thicken. Balus, I drew this after examining the old hag's corpse. The symbol was etched in the pavement with her blood by the well. Duras, this circle has nothing to do with our signs. Looks hastily made by a madman. Balus, or someone who knows exactly what symbols to twist to sow fear among wenches and old-timers. The priest leaned over the parchment, his thin white fingers trembling slightly over the paper. Oak, but I have some news worth hearing. Priest, not hastily made. Look at how the spiral breaks. Whoever did this knew what they were drawing. That middle line isn't a mistake, it's a cut. And it's not a Dacian symbol. The broken spiral has no place in our faith. It's an inversion, the greatest insult to the laws of life. Priest, you said the stone with the symbol was next to the woman's body? Balus, yes. The engraving was in the pavement, a step from the well. The hag's head pointed east. Didn't seem random. Duras, that's how all the cursed ones were found, facing the sun, but their souls in shadow. Balus, I was at the cemetery before coming here. The ground was torn up, like after a fight. 3 graves empty, the 4th dug down to the wood. Haven't seen anything like it since I fought in the northern lands, where beasts scavenged graves from hunger. Priest, 3 empty graves, you say? That's not the work of a hungry man. It's something more deliberate. Balus, I don't know how deliberate or how mad, but whoever did it was careful. They chose only old graves, the ones where relatives no longer come to place flowers. They worked at night, and they did it with patience. The earth was dry but dug deep. The funerary stones were pushed to the side, not broken. Duras, frowning, what does a man seek among the dead, if not gold? Balus, I'd say that too, if I didn't think he was interested in silver. But I ran into him, Duras. I saw him. He was thin, barefoot, with a tangled mane of hair and torn clothes covered in dirt. No tools, no sack, no shovel. Just a small butcher's knife and a pouch at his belt. He moved among the crosses as if the cemetery was his home. Priest, wringing his hands. Did you speak to him? Balus, he didn't stick around to chat. When he saw me, he vanished among the stones, like he knew every corner of shadow. I followed him for a while, but he melted into the darkness, more like a hungry dog than a man. Duras, striking his staff on the floor. Such a mongrel has no place in my village. If you see him again, cut off his hands and hang them at the gate. Priest. Hold on, Duras. If this man is looking for something specific, maybe he's not just a thief. Maybe he's a wanderer, one who serves another master. Balus, maybe. Or maybe he's just a wretch who's gotten used to the smell of the dead. But I saw something about him. He wasn't trembling, wasn't hiding like a scared man. He moved calmly, almost accustomed to the place, as if he'd been digging there his whole life. Duras, gritting his teeth. Then he must be found. The garrison has records of all the vagrants coming from other villages. Go to the guard captain. He keeps track of all the vagabonds. Priest, yes, and bring him back if you catch him. If he knows something about the symbol or the missing bodies, we need to find out. Balus, I'll catch him. But if he's just a hungry thief, I hope you plan to pay me for the trouble. Duras, if he's just a thief, it won't take you long. A short silence fell over the room. The lamps flickered faintly, and the thin smoke from the oil made the air seem dense, like vapor from molten stone. Duras sighed deeply, looking at the parchment on the table. Duras, you said you found the old woman by the well and the earth disturbed in the cemetery, but Mariwara wasn't the type to seek her own death. All her life I've known her. She wasn't a saint, but she was an honest woman. She worked like 10 people. She tended the communal garden with her sister Gaeta. Back when the men were still home, she'd bring water to the soldiers, bring them remedies from the forest. A woman like you rarely see. No enemies, just a mouth too loose at times. Balus. And a loose mouth brings enemies. I've seen plenty killed just for a word thrown wrong. Duras. Yes, but Mariwara was old. She didn't scare even the dogs anymore. Maybe just the truth bothered some. The priest, who until then had been twisting the edge of the parchment between his fingers, raised his gaze. Priest. She came to the temple often. She never missed the festivals. She always brought an offering, sometimes flowers, other times provisions for the poor. She didn't talk much, but she had faith. She didn't deserve an end like this. Balus. I didn't see faith in the blood on the pavement, just fear. Priest. Fear is the sister of faith. Sometimes it comes first. Duras. She had a stepdaughter. Valisa. A lost girl, people say. From a young age, her head was in the clouds. She worked around the temple for a while, but after the old priest's death, she was chased away. Balus. Why? The priest shrugs, ashamed. Priest. I don't know. I haven't found any clear mention in the temple records. Maybe she entered where she shouldn't have, but I haven't had time to investigate, especially for an unbeliever. Balus. Short, with a sharp tone. Do it well and search. This symbol isn't random. Priest. Nods. I will. But if you want a quicker answer, talk to the village wise man. He keeps the main archive at the library. He has writings older than the temple itself. Maybe he knows more about these signs and the village's history. Duras. True. That old man is strange, but he remembers everything he reads. Seek him out, Balus. Balus. That's what I'll do. A heavy silence settled between them. The lamps flickered, and the stone walls seemed to breathe slowly. Priest. I'll start the search in the archive tonight, after we bury Mariwara. Balus nodded shortly, folding the parchment and tucking it back into his belt. A heavy silence fell in the room, only the lamps flickering faintly, and the scent of burned incense rising slowly toward the stone ceiling. Duras cleared his throat, nodding toward the priest. Duras, do what you can, father. I have other matters to attend to in the village. Balus turned to the young servant girl who was waiting shyly by the door. Balus, show me the way, wench. I wouldn't want to get lost in your god's labyrinth. The servant girl nodded hastily, opening the stone door. The cold evening air rushed in, cutting through the heaviness of the incense smell. Balus descended the temple steps in silence. The cool air hit his face, the incense lingering behind like a heavy memory. The village spread out below him, small and weary, with thatched roofs and streets full of dried mud. At the corners, women gathered laundry with hasty gestures, murmuring thin prayers, and a few merchants folded their dusty cloths, ready to draw their shutters and let the night take its place. Balus passed among them with a heavy step, casting short glances, people crushed by toil, living on crumbs and believing in whatever hope remained. He stopped at a low table covered with clay pitchers and dusty bottles. Behind it, a short man with a red nose and a round belly was wiping a goblet with a dirty rag. Balus, give me the strongest wine you have, merchant, to burn my marrow after this dusty road. Merchant, casting a probing glance, rubbing his round belly. Strong, you say, stranger? Strong enough to drink or to give to the spirits as an offering? Balus, leaning on the table, strong enough to daze a man who's been drinking since birth. Not some cheap brandy, give me your best. Merchant, chuckling, pulling a dusty pitcher from under the counter, wiping it with a greasy rag. You have a taste for strong drink, stranger. This one's saved for rare occasions. Priest's wine from long ago, 6 silver. Balus tossed 6 silver onto the merchant's table, took the wine and headed toward the wise man. Balus climbed the low steps of the library, holding the carafe of wine with fingers dirty from dust. Inside, it smelled of parchment, lamp oil, and dried herbs. The shelves, made of old, blackened wood, groaned under the weight of books and scrolls. Among them, at a low table, sat a man with hunched shoulders and white hair. He was writing with a quill in a large register, and when he heard the heavy steps, he raised his gaze without haste. Wise man, I don't receive merchants at this hour. Balus, I'm not selling. Bring 2 cups. I have wine and more questions about the village. The old man shook his head, but his hands betrayed a discreet smile. He poured from a cracked cup, and the bitter smell of the drink filled the room. Wise man, wine and questions, 2 things that loosen the tongue of the learned. Balus, then let's see which one runs out first. They fell silent for a few moments. The wise man drew a deep breath and looked toward the shelves in the back. Wise man, the village has changed, stranger. Since they took the men to war, the land sleeps, the fields drown in weeds, and the women quarrel more than they pray. When there's no one left to plough, faith dries up too. Balus, I've passed through villages burned worse than this. Here you still have straight walls and a temple with silver on the doors. Wise man, silver doesn't feed, it only blinds. Everything that goes to the temple is missing from the barns. Duras knows, but he keeps quiet. He grew up with the priests, defended them in his time. Balus, that's what I've heard too, that Duras keeps the village tied with words and his staff. Wise man, he only keeps up appearances. He's old, and the young men are gone. Villages without men sink into gossip and needs, not prayer. Wise man, tell me what brings you to me. Balus, Moriwara, tell me what you know about her, and who you think cursed her. The wise man tilted his head and sighed long, as if clutching a heavy book to his chest. Wise man, she was a good woman, but quick to anger with her words. People in the village say she had hidden gold, but money didn't bring her happiness. She lost part of her fortune, but she still had enough to stir up some folks. In the village, money and luck are one and the same with curses. Balus, that's how it is everywhere. When you have more than your neighbor, you become guilty. Wise man, it was said she knew spells, but not the kind that bring rain, but the ones that stop it. Nonsense, of course. People fear everything they don't understand. I saw her at the temple. She always brought flowers and incense, spoke nicely with the priest. She wasn't a woman without faith. Balus, Duras said they got along. Wise man, they knew each other from youth. They grew up here together, and I think he respected her, even if he teased her sometimes. Mariwara had a sharp mind and didn't back down easily, even when arguing with officials. She liked to be listened to, and unlike others, she said what she thought. The wise man sighed, leaned back, and crossed his arms. Wise man, with her sister, Gaeta, she got along well. They worked the communal garden together. But with the others, rumors piled up, envies, some oaths muttered behind her back. The women gossiped that she kept silver under her bed. The men avoided her because she answered too harshly. She wasn't loved, but neither openly hated. Balus poured wine into the glasses. Balus, a woman with silver and no husband is never to the crowd's liking. Wise man, true. Gaeta still lives north of the village, by the forest. If you want to learn more, talk to her, but be careful. The woman is tough, doesn't trust strangers. Balus, I'll manage. With people, it's always the same. Either they fear you or they pay you. The wine trickled slowly into the glasses. Balus sat, leaning on the chair, his gaze lost in the lamp's flame. The wise man, enveloped in the smell of parchment and dust, watched him over the rim of the cup. Balus, you mentioned Mariwara's sister, but I've heard a few words around the village that she also had a daughter. Wise man, yes, her name's Vaelisa, and she works for me after being chased from the temple. She lives alone on the southern edge of the village, in the ruined houses by the fields. Balus, why alone? Does she have something to hide? Wise man, only her mind. She's quicker than she should be for a girl raised among peasants, and her tongue too sharp. She likes books, not daily chores. While the other women go to the garden or the river, she comes here to the library and reads. Balus, why was she chased away? Wise man, a foolishness, nothing worthy of shame. The priest back then, an old man past his days, told her to clean a side corridor. The girl, diligent, went deeper and ended up in a ritual chamber. She didn't know it was forbidden, where she found some old idols and touched them, nothing more. But for the old man, it was like she'd defiled the place. Balus, a ritual chamber, you say. And since then, people avoid her. Wise man, yes, superstitions take root quickly when people have nothing else to do. She tried to defend herself, but who listens to a lone girl? That priest died shortly after, and she was left with the shame on her shoulders. Balus, and what does she do for you? Wise man, when she was chased from the temple, I gave her a purpose here at the library. I needed a hand that knows letters and to write. Usually, she transcribes chronicles and histories, but countless times I've caught her reading more than working. Balus poured the wine again. The silence between them settled heavy, full of thoughts. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled parchment. The paper rustled dryly, and the dark ink seemed to tremble under the lamp's light. The wise man leaned over the table, muttering something in his beard. But the moment his gaze stopped on the symbol, he froze. His breathing broke, and the glass in his hand trembled slightly. He slowly raised the glass and drank it in one gulp, as if the wine anchored him in the world of the living. Wise man, where did you get this drawing? Balus, I found it next to the old hag's body and on the pavement by the well. The engraving was made with her blood in a ritual way, or someone wanted to create that impression. Wise man, this symbol, it was the sign of the curse that almost destroyed the village 20 years ago. More villagers started wearing talismans with this sign. Balus, better tell it all now, so you don't go to the other world with secrets. I've heard that unspoken secrets wake the ghouls back to life. Wise man, this symbol appeared once before, long ago, when the village was different. Back then, a young priest lived here, skilled and generous. Everyone loved him, and the temple was full. Then, something changed. Wise man, one day, he started disappearing often. He said he was going into the forest to pray in silence to Zalmoxe. No one knew what he was seeking there. After a few months, the village began to prosper suddenly. The crops yielded double, the sick recovered, and the people who followed that priest started filling up with silver. Balus, sounds more like a successful deal, not a miracle. Wise man, that's what I said too, but then misfortunes started coming upon the village. We had people dying under suspicious conditions, sick children, livestock falling in yards without reason. People turned against the priest. Then a few alerted the guardians. Balus, guardians, what did they do? Show up after the war to display their bravery? Wise man, after a month, a pair came from the capital. They investigated everything for a week. Then the curses stopped. They arrested a few people, among them women who had been close to the priest. It was said they practiced forbidden magic. During that time, the priest disappeared. No one knew if he was killed, if he hid in that cursed forest, or if he was arrested. Balus. After, wise man, the guardians confiscated every sacred text from the temple and the library that mentioned magic. Since then, no one has dared mention magic. The village lives between fear and forgetting. Balus. And does Mariwara have any connection to these? Wise man, she, Ileana, and a few other women were faithful and close to the old priest. They weren't the same after he disappeared. People in the village said they were cursed and misfortune follows them, that they angered Zalmoxe somehow. But fortunes are won and lost. There's nothing unclean about losing silver. Silence fell over them. Balus noticed the wine was finished, then stood up. The wise man followed him with a weary gaze, as if wishing he hadn't uttered those words. Outside, night drew its veil over the village. The few lamps burned dimly, trembling in the wind. Balus headed toward the tavern, with heavy steps, a carafe of wine awaiting him. Knocks on the door pounded against the wood with fury, not those of a well-wisher, but of someone who wanted to break into the house. "Open up, girl! Open or I'll tear down the door." Belisa woke abruptly, startling. A thick pain throbbed in her skull, like after a night where wine and forgetting flowed too easily. She felt her bones soft and the cold biting her soles as she got out of bed. Belisa quickly threw a cloth over her shoulders and, swaying slightly, pulled the bolt. She barely managed to open the door when Gaeta burst in whirlwind, with purple cheeks and red eyes from crying. "Gaeta, Mariwara is dead. May Zalmoxe strike me. My Mariwara is dead." She's gone, Zalmoxes, forgive her. They found her by the well, with her eyes rolled back and the blood drained from her. The ghoul sucked her soul from her chest. She collapsed into her arms, howling more than speaking, as only a sister can when half her soul dies. And that's how it was. Mariwara had been everything to Geta. The words hit both of them. Velisa. What are you saying? When? Geta. They found her this morning. By the well, there was blood on the pavement and marks. Marks made with beast claws, people say. An unclean death, girl. A cursed death. The village is in terror, girl. Velisa leaned against the edge of the table, trying to gather her thoughts.
It echoed in her mind the voice of Mariwara cursing her, the last time she saw her sharp, full of venom. She remembered how Mariwara had rifled through a hidden book under her chest, bound in black cloth, and how the woman had caught her. Screams, curses, harsh words. Then the door slammed, and silence.
Geta. A foul death, like I've never heard. They say ghouls are walking again through the village. Velisa remained nailed to the spot. The image flashed suddenly in her mind. Mariwara rummaging through her chest, her prying hands searching through papers and cloths. Velisa. How did it happen? She stopped. Geta. As if that happens when a person doesn't fear the gods. By Zalmoxe, girl. You two played with things you shouldn't have. I told you to leave those foolish books and cursed symbols alone. They've only brought you trouble. Look what you've done. Velisa. Shut up, woman. I didn't kill her. Geta. No, but your hands are dirty with her words. She was a mother to you, even if she didn't give you blood. She raised you, gave you shelter, and you, what did you do? Locked yourself in this house like a possessed woman and forgot about the world. She blew her nose noisily and looked around. The house smelled of dampness, the tables covered with parchments, wax, unwashed pots. Geta, Zalmoxe, strike me if it doesn't fill me with horror. Look at yourself, girl. Your house is a disgrace, your life in disarray, and you're still wearing those rags. Velisa closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in the heavy air deeply. Everything hurt her. Velisa. What day is it today, Geta? The woman looked at her, surprised by the question. Geta. Today is Monday, the first day of spring. Velisa shook her head slowly. Spring, and she remembered nothing from a week ago. The last clear thing was Mariwara's voice, furious, and that cursed book. Geta made the Zalmoxian sign, swallowing her tears with difficulty. Geta. We're going to the temple tonight. They'll do the prayer and burial properly. Wear something nice, not these mourning rags. She's your mother, even if stepmother. Velisa looked at her, long, without answering. Geta sighed, and with eyes full of reproach, turned toward the door. Geta, take care of yourself, girl. If you don't watch out, you'll end up like her. The house fell silent after Geta slammed the door. Velisa leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Her head hurt, as if she'd slept a week with a stone on her temples. The morning light filtered through the cracked shutter. On the table, the plates were unwashed, the wine dried in the jug like old blood. She tried to remember, but in her mind, time was torn. The last clear memory was Mariwara's voice yelling at her, eyes bulging, holding that black book stolen from the temple. Then, just darkness. A void of a week, a dreamless sleep. Velisa slumped into the chair, her hands trembling on her knees. The argument came back to her. The old woman screaming that she brought shame to the house, that Zalmoxe doesn't forgive women, who meddle with the gods' secrets. She, young and full of venom, responding with a curse, slipped through her teeth, spoken more out of pride than belief. Then silence, a silence that now chilled her. She stood up, suddenly feeling a terrible, raw hunger, almost painful. She opened the cupboard, but everything was spoiled. The bread was moldy, the cheese yellow with age, the meat stinking. A bitter nausea rose in her throat. "What the hell?" she whispered. It was as if time itself had passed by her without touching her, but had rotted her life. She pulled her pouch of silver from under the bed and dumped it out. The coins fell with a dry clatter, fewer than she remembered. She counted them, pursing her lips. Her gaze then fell on the small mirror on the wall. Her face seemed fuller, more alive. She went to the chest and pulled out a simple dress, made of brown cloth, clean but tight at the waist, accentuating her curves without flaunting them. She also put on a thin hooded cloak, patched but still good enough to hide her face. Outside, the village moved slowly, with weary people dragging the weight of early spring behind them. Felisa pulled the hood over her head and with silent steps set off toward the market. She needed food, air, something alive to pull her from that sleep that refused to end. The merchants buzzed at their stalls, each shouting louder than the next. The air was thick with mixed smells, salted fish, spilled wine, smoke from burned wood, and sweat. Felisa pulled her hood deeper over her head. Her steps got lost in the crowd, but the stares stuck to her like a shameful disease. Ever since the priest had chased her from the temple, every move she made seemed an insult to the gods. A few stalls away, screams rang out. An old hag dressed in black, with tangled hair, was hurling curses at a tall man wearing weathered armor, his gaze sharp. Babadocia. "May the shadows take you, stranger. Zalmoxe protect us from you." The man said nothing. He just looked at her briefly, cutting, cold, without a drop of fear, then turned his back and walked away, as if the old woman were just a noisy insect. "Merchant, Docia's at it again. That woman's tongue has no cure. For about 3 days now, she's been cursing anyone who sets foot in the market." Felisa approached him. The man, round-bellied with cheeks burned by the wind, lit up when he saw her. "Merchant." "The book wench. How are you doing, girl? The news has reached you again, through the village. Babadocia mentioned you this morning too. She said you meddle with the gods' words and sold your soul for writing and reading." Felisa raised an eyebrow, trying to seem indifferent. "Felisa, that's all she knows. If she learned to read, maybe she wouldn't curse in vain." "Merchant, don't joke about that woman. Girl." Many avoid contradicting her. They say one guy's cows dried up after he laughed in her face. "Felisa, the cows dried up because they weren't milked, not from words." "Merchant, maybe, but there's no one in the village who sees her and doesn't make the Zalmoxian sign. Today she jumped at that stranger. Big as a gate and with eyes of iron, she said he's bringing death to the village." "Felisa, death comes anyway, with or without words." "Merchant, maybe, but he didn't flinch, didn't even dodge. When the old hag cursed him, he just looked at her as if measuring her for a grave." Felisa smiled faintly, pulling her hood tighter. "Felisa, and people got scared, of course. Merchant, how could they not? They say it's a bad sign not to fear Docia. Only madmen and the dead don't fear her. Felisa. Or maybe just people who have nothing to lose." Felisa walked on among the stalls, trying not to pay attention to the stares that followed her like needles. She stopped at an old merchant with hands stained with flour and eyes sunk in wrinkles. Felisa, give me a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a piece of meat, if you have any left. Merchant, of course, girl. I'll put them in your bag. He looked at her closely, then with a slight pity in his voice. Merchant, you've lost weight. Take care of yourself. It's not a good time to walk alone through the village. Felisa mumbled an without looking at him, and left a few silver on the table. A few steps further, the reddish wine in a clay jug caught her eye. The wine merchant, a thin man with a red nose and an eternal smile in the corner of his mouth, raised an eyebrow. Merchant, I haven't seen you drink, you book wench, but today you look like you need it. Felisa, my head's splitting. Maybe the wine will cure me. Merchant, or put you to sleep, or bury you. But it's good, made from southern grapes. 5 silver, and it'll keep you warm. Felisa took out the money, placed it in his palm, and took the jug. Homecoming and the funeral. She walked away with soft steps, clutching the jug to her chest. The headache pressed harder and harder. In the hut, it was cold and smelled of dampness. The floor was full of thrown clothes, scattered books, crumpled parchments, and a chair leaned crookedly against the table, like an old man on his deathbed. Felisa put the provisions on the table, but didn't touch them. She drew a deep breath, looking at the mess. She felt no shame, no urge to fix it, just a pressing fatigue enveloping her body. She poured a glass of wine and drank it in one breath. The liquid burned her throat and seemed to wake her for a moment. She headed to the chest in the corner and lifted the heavy lid. The old fabric smelled of wood and smoke. On top of everything lay a dress she hadn't worn recently. Mariuara had given it to her as a gift right after Felisa started serving at the temple. The woman had been proud then, boasting in the whole village that her stepdaughter served Zalmoxe. Felisa ran her fingers over the embroidery, a heavy knot tightening in her throat. There, let Zalmoxe see you, good girl. Mariuara's voice echoed in her mind, and for a moment her eyes grew moist. She looked at herself in a small, cracked mirror. The dress still fit her perfectly, the fabric hugged her body, and in the dim light her skin seemed warmer, more alive than she remembered. The sun was setting red, like a wound over the village fields, when Mariuara's body was brought to the edge of the temple. The smell of wine and fresh earth mixed in the spring air. The women placed the coffin on a wooden bier, and the priest, dressed in white robes with golden threads, raised the silver chalice to the sky. Priest, as clay breaks and returns to clay, so the breath rises to light. Do not weep, for death is only the short path to Zalmoxe. Today, a daughter of the village drinks with the gods. A murmur passed through the crowd. The apprentices poured wine into wooden cups and handed them to the people. Short laughs were heard here and there, while the old women wiped their eyes with the corner of their kerchiefs. An old man stuck a torch in the ground and sang softly, in an ancient tone, a passing prayer. Crowd in chorus. The path is straight, good soul. Through the light of the gods, drink from the bottomless cup and return to their heavens. Felisa arrived just then, with her hood pulled down, the grey dress touched by the wind. She slipped among the people without being noticed, until Geta saw her. Geta, through sobs, she's come, Finally, you've come, girl. Balisa, I couldn't miss it, even if she wouldn't have wanted to see me. Get her. She didn't forgive you, even in her last hour, but she still mentioned you. She said that if she dies before you, maybe Zalmoxe will make you a real woman. The funerals end and the priests offer. Balisa clutched her cloak to her chest, silent. Around them wine flowed from the large chalice, and its sweetish vapor rose over the dug graves. Priest, drink in honor of the one who has gone, for in death there is no end but beginning. May the wine wash her sins and the fire open her path. Laughter, the clink of cups, the smell of incense and roasted meat, a celebration of death, as only the Dacians knew how to do it. Balisa paused for a moment and closed her eyes, listening to the prayer until the end. She knew it from childhood, but now the words had a different taste, bitter, almost guilty. A few torches still burned at the edge of the fresh grave, and the red wine flowed onto the damp earth like an offering. The service had ended. The villagers dispersed in silence. The priest remained alone, gazing at the old stone crosses. Balisa was preparing to leave, but his voice stopped her. Priest, wait a moment, child. I'd like to talk a bit. She turned, slightly embarrassed, but greeted him with respect. Balisa, of course, father. Priest, I heard you work at the library. I've seen you rarely at the temple, but they've told me you read a lot. Balisa, as much as work allows, books are sometimes kinder than people. Priest, times have changed, and I need people who can think clearly. You can come back to the temple to help with transcriptions. No one will close the doors to you anymore. Balisa, with a slight hesitation, your words honor me, father. I'll think about it. The priest then pulled an old parchment from his robe, carefully folding it in half. Priest, this was found on Mariowara's skin. This mark, it's not Dacian. I asked the village elders too, but they all swear they've never seen it. You work with old texts. Have you encountered anything similar? Balisa looked at the symbol. A chilling familiarity ran through her, but she kept her expression calm. Balisa, I don't recognize it exactly, but I came across something similar in an old chronicle. It only mentioned some oddities that happened in the village about 20 years ago. Priest, what kind of oddities? Balisa, nothing about deaths or curses, just people who got rich suddenly, without clear reasons, and then their names disappeared from the records, as if they had never existed. In place of those pages are just blank spaces and torn pages. Priest, and you found nothing about magic, about rituals? Balisa, no. It's strange, father. In the whole library there's no book about magic, just chronicles, legends, myths, and old children's stories, as if someone had striven to erase any trace of secret knowledge. The priest sighed, looking at the cloudy sky. Priest, maybe some secrets shouldn't be left among people. Balisa, or maybe that's exactly why they should be preserved, so they don't get lost. An almost fatherly smile crossed the priest's face. Priest, you have a quick tongue, child, but a clear mind. I'll keep in mind what you said. Then, with a sudden change of tone, he added, Priest, a stranger came to the village. A mercenary named Balus, who's staying at the tavern. Dura sent him to clear up Mariowara's death. If he needs help, give him a sign. Maybe together you'll unravel something that escapes us. Balisa, bowing her head slightly. I'll do that, father. He looked at her for a few moments, then clutched the parchment to his chest. Priest, Good. Go now. And when you feel ready, come back to the temple. The doors won't close to you anymore. She took a step back, letting her hood shadow her face. Valisa, as you say, Father. When she turned toward the exit, a breeze extinguished one of the torches. The smoke rose into the air, while the flame flickered for a moment. Home and the Forbidden Book. Valisa arrived home with heavy steps dragging the evening shadows behind her. The alleys had emptied, and the flickering light of lamps from houses got lost among the threads of mist descending from the fields. She threw her cloak over the back of the chair and lit the lamp's wick, which ignited with a soft sigh, spreading a yellowish light over the disorder in the room. Tables full of papers, unwashed dishes, a heavy book forgotten on the floor. She poured wine into a clay cup, tasted a sip, then another. Each swallow seemed to ease her headache. She sat at the table, looking at the book with blackened leather covers, which she had stolen from the temple. For a while she just stared at it, as if waiting for the volume to open itself. On the first page, it was written in twisted letters. A curse is not born from words, but from will. The fire of anger and pain gives it breath. Not all can utter it, but those chosen by gods or by old blood carry the power in their veins. The curse binds what is corrupt to what deserves punishment. Valisa felt her chest tighten. She hadn't just uttered the curse. Something or someone had listened. She remembered Mariuara's face that evening. Narrowed eyes, sharp voice, and hands rummaging through her things. There she had found the book, holding it like proof of shame. You've lost your mind, wench. You stole it from the temple, defiled it. You bring shame to my house. Mariuara had screamed like a beast, her voice loaded with fear and contempt. Then she remembered the blow that made her lose her temper and the incantation from the book stolen from the temple. She, blinded by fury, had responded without thinking. Zalmoxe, repay your sins. Suck the blood from your earth as you sucked my life. She swallowed hard. Until now, she had believed it was just a word thrown in anger. But the book contradicted her. Pages further on, she had read, "A curse strikes only the one with sin in soul or weak in mind. The gods do not hear vain anger, but only just revenge. A curse is not a prayer, but a command. It has power only when the will of the one who utters it is fed by blood or hatred. But not anyone can make curses, only those touched by the old lines of fallen priests, or those chosen by gods through passion and pain. A curse is not spoken with the lips, but with the heart. Its power lies in the fire of anger and in the blood that feeds it." She turned the page. Curses do not touch the clean-minded man, nor the one without guilt. They bind only to those who carry the burden of fault, for guilt feeds the power. A strong soul rejects them, but the guilty one melts beneath them, like wax in fire. She continued reading. "The curse can be broken only through the blessing of a servant of light, or through the repentance of the one who uttered it. But the gods demand balance, and often the one seeking deliverance pays with their own blood." Valisa shuddered. Mariuara, with all her harshness and wealth, had lived with a sin. That explained why Zalmoxe had left her prey to the curse. But further down, the lines darkened even more. The cursed priests banished from the temples of light perfected this art. They learned to bind blood to earth and guilt to death. Each perfected a symbol of their own. In the book was given, as an example, the symbol that the priest had shown her earlier. Valisa remained motionless for a long time, listening to the wind creak at the windows. The lamp flickered weaker, and the shadows lengthened on the walls like outstretched hands. In a corner, under a pile of papers and junk, she remembered she still had a book. The small volume, found by chance between the pages of a chronicle about Dacian kings. She took it out carefully. It was bound in thin leather, the color of burned honey, without a title on the cover. She felt its weight in her palm, as if it hid more than letters. She had stolen it from the library without knowing why. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of instinct. Now she understood she had done well. On the first leaf, it was written with reddish ink, about talismans, book for those who seek protection from the dead and from those risen from the earth. She flipped quickly, the pages rustling like dry leaves, until she reached the incantation. Zalmoxe, who sees and judges, let the shadow not touch the flesh, let the enemies perish in your light.
On the adjacent page, she found the simple list. As for a craftsman to make a talisman, pure metal, a strand of hair pulled, not cut, a drop of blood mixed with sacred ash. She searched through the chest with junk and old things, where she had items collected from times when she believed the future would smile on her. Under a piece of cloth, she found a small silver pendant received from the cursed Mariora. The silver was matte, but still polished at the edges. She rubbed it with her sleeve until it shone a little. She placed it on the table, almost with reverence. Then, with trembling fingers, she pulled a strand of hair from her head and tied it with thin thread, twisting it around the medallion, like a thread of life. Then, she took out from a cupboard a small bag with old ash she had taken before it was forbidden at the temple. Her heart pounded in her chest. She felt the old aroma of wine in her mouth, and the hot taste of the thought that she was doing something forbidden. Vailisa, Zalmoxe, who sees and judges, let the shadow not touch the flesh. Let the enemies perish in your light.
Nothing, no flicker of the flame, no sign. Just the heavy silence of the room and a faint smell of heated metal. Vailisa remained thoughtful for a moment, looking at the stained medallion. Then she sighed shortly and tied it around her neck with a thin string. The lamp's flame flickered, but only from the draught. She poured another glass of wine, drank it in one breath, and went to bed. She felt like a fool for believing the ritual would work. In the air floated the same feeling as before, cold silence and uncertainty. The ghouls' assault night settled heavy over the village. Beneath the cold earth, something stirred. The soil rose slightly, as if breathing, and from it emerged a dry silhouette, wrapped in its own skin. The ghoul, a collection of bones held together by pale, weathered skin. Hunger roused it from sleep, not hunger for flesh, but for blood and memories. It could still taste the sweet, almost living flavor of marijuana. It recognized her scent, her voice, the beating of her heart. But that body had been drained dry. Still, a few memories lingered. In its dead mind, the woman's echo showed the way to new prey. The alley to the south, the house with the sagging roof, the smell of wax and books. Its shadow glided through the village, without sound, with short, jerky movements. Dogs cowered and whimpered briefly, then fell silent. When it reached Vailisa's house, it needed no search. In its mind, Mariora laughed and opened that weathered wooden door, just as she had so many times. A door it remembered, even if her mind was now ash. With the same motion, the ghoul pushed the latch. The wood creaked. Inside, the bedroom smelled of old smoke and stale wine. The ghoul approached the bed, and recognition ignited in its eyes. The girl's face from another life, the one who had uttered the curse, the one who had unwittingly summoned death. It gazed at her with a desire mingled with hatred. It drew closer, sniffing the air, scenting her skin, her blood, her fear and sins. It extended its skeletal hand toward her, but then, at Balus's throat, the silver talisman flared. First like a spark, then like a bluish flame. The light struck its palm and the ghoul's lifeless flesh burned smoking. It let out a sound unlike anything human. A groan torn between pain and hatred. Balus awoke, still dazed, and for a moment saw the tall, gaunt silhouette, damp with rotting clothes clinging to its body. In the trembling light of the talisman, she glimpsed its disfigured face, half man, half memory. The shadow lunged toward the window, smashing it with force. The glass shattered like a scream. Before vanishing into the night, it let out a hoarse, ragged howl that pierced the alleys and roused the village from sleep. Dogs began to bark, and lights flickered on behind windows. Balisa remained frozen, terrified, her heart pounding wildly, staring at the talisman that still glowed faintly. Balus awakens to chaos. Balus woke from the darkness of drunkenness to the uproar in the tavern. He had slept in the small room above the tavern, a cramped little chamber with a straw bed and the smell of mould. But the clamour below yanked him from his stupor like a knife in the ribs. He lifted his head, smoothed his bald scalp and beard with his palm, then descended the stairs heavily. Downstairs, the tavern was packed with rabble gathered in clusters, their faces pale and eyes wide like frightened rabbits. They all spoke at once, each with a more superstitious version than the last. Some claimed to have heard a scream torn from graves, others that it was some drunken wench taken by spirits. One said he heard a howl from the south, from the district of the poor cursed by life. Another swore it came from the forest, a yell of man or beast, not a phantom. They vowed they had seen a long shadow passing over the rooftops, with eyes red as embers. Balus watched them with contempt, but listened from the shadows. Discerning details from stories was part of a mercenary's trade. It was useful to listen even to superstitions and sift lies from truth. All he remembered from last night was the conversation with the wise man and listening to music, but his memory darkened after the second carafe of wine. His thoughts slid to the thief in the cemetery. He didn't care that the man had desecrated graves or stolen from those gone to the afterlife. What bothered him was that the fool had slipped through his fingers in the cemetery. On some days, a Dacian feels the need to crush someone's skull with his hammer or foot. Sometimes a knife in a scoundrel's gut cures the thirst for revenge. His leg felt healed. The Dacian wine seemed to have sped it all up. Only a dull ache still pulsed under the skin. Maybe he could earn some silver on that one's head. Balus pushed open the garrison door and entered. The garrison was a modest, worn building with walls scarred by years and patches of mould. The air inside hit him like a thick stench, rancid sweat of the unwashed, mixed with the smell of rusted metal and dried manure, a reek that nearly floored him. He regretted not downing a carafe of wine beforehand. This was a place where men lived like scum in barracks. Zalmoxe had surely abandoned these wretches. The captain sat at a rickety table, talking with two stocky guards, their faces sunburned and armor-patched. When Balus stepped in, the captain looked up, recognizing him from Duras's description. He signaled the guards to get back to work. The two grumbled under their breath as they left, leaving them alone in the dimly lit room with a smoking torch. The captain, a man of about 50 winters, dressed modestly in a worn tunic with a knife at his belt, rose slowly, his gaze rational, contrasting with the frightened villagers. He had been a captain in the Imperial Army, now serving here until retirement in a post forgotten by the world. The garrison discussion, Balus about Mariwara, Zalmoxe, guide her. Captain laughs shortly, without humor. Duras told me a stranger started poking around the village. What have you found out? Balus, I talked to the villagers. They told me they found her at dawn, pale as lime, by the well with eyes wide open as if she'd seen the devil's phantom. I can confirm the bite on her neck, or whatever stabbed her, was the cause of death. The healer said Mariwara was left without blood in her body. And I found something else sinister at the crime scene. Balus sat, uninvited, on the chair in front. The wood creaking under his weight, pulled the crumpled parchment from his pocket and unfolded it on the table. Balus. She had this symbol carved into her chest skin, the same symbol inscribed in the pavement by the well in blood. The cursed one, or ones, wanted to scare the villagers, or maybe some thug seeking fame. What can you tell me about Mariwara? Who'd want to kill her in such a way? And about the symbol? The captain pulled the parchment toward him, studying it with furrowed brows. Captain, about the symbol? Nothing. It looks like filth imagined by Goths to scare women. But about the crime, nothing more than what you've heard. I can only tell you that since the Imperial Command sent me here, I've dealt with no murders, just petty thefts, animal attacks, drunken brawls in the village, and Docia's scandals. This is the first brutal murder I'm investigating. But we had another woman who died last week, torn apart by a beast. Balus, what makes you think it's not the same criminal hand? Captain, she had no symbols on her body, just bite marks, and her blood wasn't missing like Mariwara's. Balus, and where did you find this wench? Captain, at the edge of the northern forest, the forester alerted us. Balus, good. And what can you tell me about Mariwara? Did she have enemies? Captain, personally, Mariwara seemed a pious woman to me. I saw her often at the temple, and most spoke well of her, except a few older folks, led by that gossiping old hag, Dacia. Balus interrupted, laughing, remembering the vile old woman from the day before. Balus, how many gossiping old hags do you have in this village? Captain, one, thankfully. Balus, what accusations did the wench bring against her? Captain, the old hag came to me one day, sneaking into the garrison so no one would see. Probably didn't want the village gossiping that she was ratting people out. Dacia, Zalmoxe forgive her, told me Mariwara had the devil in her soul and practiced his magic. That's why her garden stayed green even in winter. Only the devil has the power to keep things green, she said, after cursing and insulting her like some gothic filth. Then she sneaked out, as if she were a spy in the Imperial Army. Later I asked other elders in the village, but most avoided talking about Mariwara. Others said how devoutly she praised Zalmoxe at the temple. Balus, and where did Mariwara live? Maybe we'll find a clue there. Captain, easy. You can't miss it. She lived in the manor house by the well. Balus, manor house? She really must have had the devil in her soul to be rich in this village of paupers. Captain, resigned, replying, Maybe to some, wealth seems a secret, hidden by Zalmoxe, but the truth is Mariwara was sharp-minded and sharp-tongued at times, but the woman knew business. If not for her, this village might have starved. Balus. Interesting. Still, I have someone in mind. Maybe I've even found your cursed one. If everyone's saying we're dealing with a ghoul, I investigated the cemetery and came across a scoundrel digging graves. Thin and unwashed, he nearly blended with all the unearthed dead. Only the stench gave him away. But when I tried to grab him, the snake slipped through the graves. Know anything about thieves in the village? Captain, rubbing his temple. I've gotten a few reports from villagers about pickpockets around town. First time hearing of such a grave-robbing scum. Balus, where do these wretches have their den, and why haven't you caught them yet? Captain, since the war, I only have 10 guards to lead. They're all fat, lazy, and some downright stupid. Curse or blessing, the village put them all to plough fields. But if you want some silver, and to help the village catch the outlaws. If the reports are right, they hole up in the south of the village, among the abandoned houses. Balus, how much silver if I catch them? Captain, 100 alive, 50 dead. Balus, happy he'll earn silver-cracking skulls, stood from the table. He gave the captain the warrior salute as a sign of respect. Warriors always appreciated recognition. Balus breathed relieved. He'd gotten more information and escaped the stench. Into the cursed forest. The forest edge greeted him with cold air and the smell of damp earth. Among the black trunks, Balus spotted a massive man with a tangled beard and tired eyes, leaning on his axe like a staff. His clothes were stained with resin, reeking of smoke and sweat. You could smell him from a mile away. But if he'd worn armor, people would have taken him for a warrior. Balus pulled a silver from his pouch, twirled it between his fingers, and tossed it to the forester. The man caught it on reflex, grinning. Balus, mate, you live more in the forest than in the village. Heard the uproar in town, all sorts of wenches howling that the devil rose from the ground. Forester, pocketing the silver. Last night, I was heading back to the village after a day's work in the woods. It was quiet, just the wind howling. And suddenly, I heard a roar. Not like wolves, not like any forest beast. Sharper, hungrier. Then something took off running through the trunks. Fast, too fast. Balus, grinning wider. And what did you do? Forester, spitting in the dust. I stayed the hell hidden. Balus, without answering, just raising an eyebrow. Which way did it run? Forester, pointing with the axe northeast. That way. But watch yourself, stranger. It sounded like filth. Balus slung his hammer over his shoulder and set off in the indicated direction, saying nothing more, ignoring the warning. Only wenches and cowards feared imagined phantoms. At first, the forest was peaceful, light falling in golden strips through the branches, the wind swaying them lazily. After 2 hours of walking, as he pressed on, the trees thickened. Branches drew closer, knotted like swollen veins. The light turned cold, greenish-grey, and the air smelled of churned earth. Balus noticed tracks, large, irregular, like those of a beast fleeing in haste, carving a path through the dense brush. After another hour, the forest began to die. Trunks hollow inside, leaves black, and from cracks in the bark oozed yellowish sap, rotten like pus from an old wound. The stench of death hung in the air. The forest's rustle vanished completely. The silence was so deep that Balus could hear his own heart beating. In the distance, he spotted a building carved into rock. Perhaps there he'd find the grave robber. After yet another hour, ahead among the withered trees rose a black cliff. From it grew an ancient structure, like an old crypt covered in dark moss, like dirty hands. Near the entrance, Balus saw a nameless funerary stone. The earth around it was freshly dug. Balus clenched his jaw and approached the monument. On the crypt walls were unknown symbols, deeply carved, some worn by time, others seemingly burned fresh into the stone like warnings. He climbed the cracked steps and reached the entrance. A massive stone slab, no hinges, no latch, just a circular hole in the center, palm-sized. Curious, Balus tried to open the huge stone door. Nothing he attempted worked. The enormous stone remained unmoved. After a minute of thinking, his gaze locked on the images carved in the stone. Balus cursed the craftsmen in his mind for their shoddy work. Their labor hadn't even survived a few centuries. After a more thorough inspection, he discovered fragments not erased by time or nature's whims. The carved images told a story, one in his view, not a good one, if it could be told in a few pictures. On one observed image were priests. On another, a band of 12 men who could be considered scoundrels. On others, a few battles. And at the end, he saw something any Dacian would recognize. In the center, clearer than the rest, the round symbol of Zalmoxe, engraved deep, as if the only sign time had spared. He thought for a moment, probably the damn thing opens with a Zalmoxian sign. Armed with the new information, he began searching for a disc, but found none that could fit into the stone. A Dacian never ran out of options, and he arrived at the one he liked, and that always worked for him. Force. He started hammering the huge stone. After a few blows, he paused to assess his work. All that effort, and the damned stone didn't have a scratch. Frustrated, Balus began cursing with every hammer strike. After 10 minutes of fruitless effort, Balus gave up and prepared to leave. Then from behind the slab came a man's voice, weak and desperate, begging for help. The sound seemed human, trembling, loaded with fear, coming from deep within the stone, not from the forest. Voice, "Hello, is anyone there? Help, help, someone get me out of here, please." Bang, bang, bang. His meditation was interrupted by a powerful blow against the stone at the entrance. It was total darkness here, an absolute black, like a canvas of tar that swallowed any flicker, any shadow of light, any hope of freedom. But he could see perfectly. His eyes were accustomed to the abyss, discerning every crack in the slab, every vein of stone, every speck of dust floating in the stale air, as if the darkness itself was his servant, revealing the world in shades of ash and dried blood, a kingdom where centuries had melted into dust, where time was only a forgotten heartbeat, where he, prisoner for ages, he dreamed of freedom, to finish what he had begun, to break the seals, then to pour the forbidden magic over the world like a flood of blood and death. Some scum of a guardian coming to disturb him again. The cursed Zalmoxe himself come to exterminate him. But the blows grew more violent. Someone was very determined to meet him. Perhaps a new acolyte. He had had one for a while some time ago, but he didn't know how much time had passed since then. Here the sun did not shine. Darkness was his domain, a kingdom where time had melted into dust, where centuries were only forgotten heartbeats. He approached the door and seemed to hear a voice. The closer he got to the slab, the more curses and blasphemies against Zalmoxe poured through the stone. crude, unpolished, spoken by a man who feared no gods. That made him smile. Perhaps this was the new acolyte who had broken the first magical seal and allowed him to use his magic outside the cursed crypt. A new enemy, or just a simple adventurer? After the events of the last centuries, perhaps a bit of caution was wiser after all. In the end, he had had time to contemplate his mistakes, which he swore he would not repeat. He had always loved theatre, and lying was second nature to him. He approached the door and shouted, his voice full of fear and tears, like an old man with a broken soul. Man from the crypt. Hello? Is anyone there? Help! Help! Someone get me out of here. Please. The blows stopped. Voice from outside. Who's there? Man from the crypt. Petrescu. Please help me. I've been trapped here for a day. Get me out of here. Voice from outside. I'd try, but this damn thing won't open. No handle to grab. Not even force moves it. But tell me, mate, how did you end up stuck on that side? And who dug the grave? Man from the crypt. My friend and I are historians investigating Dacian legends. History is very important. We believe the first great priest of the Dacians was buried here. When we arrived, a storm forced us into the temple, where we learned it was cursed and full of traps. When we came out, Morel was poisoned. Voice from outside. Very interesting that now you're trapped on the other side. Man from the crypt. Perhaps curiosity or greed made me go back, but also the equipment we came with. Please help me. Voice from outside. Let me guess. I need a disc with Zalmoxe's sign on it. Man from the crypt. Silent for a few moments before answering. This is interesting. Clearly not initiated in Dacian mysteries, but quick-minded. He could be a useful servant, or perhaps the key to breaking the final seal. I think you're right. Zalmoxe is the one who lights our path. In his mind, he cursed Zalmoxe. If he ever catches the new Zalmoxe, he will suffer. Voice from outside. Oh, we have a priest among us. Enlighten me. Your Holiness, where do I find a disc? All I see here are weathered walls, a fresh grave, and a dead forest. Man from the crypt. Every temple should have such a disc in the chamber dedicated to sacred objects. Is there a temple nearby? Voice from outside. Yes, but I don't see how I can convince them to part with a relic. Man from the crypt. Perhaps you can persuade the priest for a good cause, or one of the people around the temple knows something. Voice from outside. What do you know about ghouls? Man from the crypt. I'm afraid very little, just that they are wandering souls. So will you help me? Voice from outside. Know that help never comes free, especially when it involves dealing with Zalmoxe's servants. Man from the crypt. It would be a shame to let me rot beside the treasures of the Dacian gates. Voice from outside. Can you survive in there? Man from the crypt. Yes, I have provisions for a week, but please hurry. Balus's temptation and the thief's capture. Perhaps the stranger would be the key to his escape from this cursed crypt, or the next sacrifice. Until then, however, the second seal required preparation and blood. One more victim had to fall before the ancient chains could break. The acolyte from the past had served him well, in life and now beyond death. Apparently, it had been useful to have descendants. Everything smelled like lies and a trap to him, but the thought of hidden Dacian treasure softened his caution. Gold always had the gift of making even curses seem negotiable. If he came out of this alive, he'd avoid such contracts in the future. With Dacian treasure, he'd seek a decent tavern, with wine in abundance and clean beds. Then he'd crack bandit skulls for pleasure, not need. From the drunks in taverns, he'd heard all sorts of stories about Dacian treasures, some guarded by spirits, others cursed with ancient words, others buried by greedy priests who preached moderation but lived in plenty. It always seemed curious to him how priests were mentioned near gold, but never near work. He, for one, did honest work. Someone had to clean the world of scum, like the grave thief from the day before. If he'd caught him and dragged him tied to the magistrate and priest, perhaps the temple archives would have opened to him. He didn't like the thought at all. Reading drained his strength and will to live. Dacian eyes were made to gaze at wenches and battlefields, not crooked signs scratched in stone by oily, greedy priests. But if that's what brought him closer to treasure, he could endure even that humiliation. The way back to the village seemed shorter, as if determination had lightened his steps. He scanned the forest but saw no suitable spot where a scoundrel could hide loot taken from the dead. The abandoned houses on the village edge, however, told a different story. That's where dirty things always gathered. Fugitives, secrets, thieves, and unfinished sins. After a few hours of searching, he came upon a rundown shack with fresh tracks in the mud and a stench that could only come from a man living lower than beasts. He chose a good spot to stake out and waited. His patience was rewarded after about half an hour, when the scum appeared, slipping through a gap where a door had once been. He was careless, confident, and reeked of old carry-on and sour sweat. Balus gave him no time to think. He struck full force, slamming him to the ground with all his weight, then delivered a short, precise kick, enough to knock him unconscious. The thief fell like a sack of potatoes. With a dull groan, he stood, dusted his hands, and searched the room. He found a sturdy rope, tied him tight, and started looking. He didn't have to dig far. Almost immediately, he discovered a bulging sack of silver jewelry and other valuables. Only the silver interested him. He counted 50 pieces, stuffed them in his pouch, and didn't look back. He tied the sack to the thief, grabbed the rope, and set off for the garrison, dragging his prey and the scum behind him, leaving the abandoned house to return to its rotten silence. Villagers gathered as Balus advanced down the alley, dragging the grave thief's body like a pig through the middle of the village. Some watched in amazement, others in open fear. It was the first time they'd seen a stranger do what their guards hadn't managed for months. No one dared block his path. They just stepped aside, like before a storm that didn't concern them directly, but could strike any time. The village's judgment and the bounty. A silent, curious, and uneasy crowd formed behind him. They murmured among themselves, but no one shouted, no one stopped him. Balus didn't look left or right. He kept to his path with heavy, sure steps, as if the entire village was nothing more than a trail to the next thing to solve. Arriving at the garrison, he let the bound body fall to the ground without care. It was late afternoon, and the sun struck obliquely on the old palisade. He raised his fist and knocked on the thick wooden door, several times, slow and heavy. After a few moments, the door opened and the captain stepped out. He stopped abruptly, surprised by the scene before him. The recently arrived stranger, the grave thief, tied up tight, the villagers gathered like at a trial. "Captain, what do we have here?" The tone was calm, but his eyes darted quickly over the details. He had already understood more than he let on. "Balus, This is the scum I told you about. Hope he hasn't gone slow in the head after the justice he got from the gods." He started laughing. Then Balus took the sack of goods and offered it to the captain. "Balus, this is what he stole from the villagers and from those beyond. Zalmoxe, watch over them." The captain took the sack and checked it, rummaging through the jewelry and silver. He immediately recognized a few items the villagers had reported stolen: a gold chain, a ring with a Dacian symbol, a silver bracelet. "Captain, good work, stranger," patted him friendly on the shoulder. Then to the crowd of villagers, "This stranger found the thief who made your lives poorer. Those who have stolen items, please come forward later to recover them." The crowd murmured, some clapped weakly, others looked fearfully at the bound body. "Balus, and my reward?" "Captain, come inside so we can lock him up." In the garrison, the stench was even heavier: sweat, metal, and urine. The captain pulled a pouch of silver from a ragged cabinet and handed it to Balus, happy to have found someone not completely useless, like the village guards. "Captain, if you find time, maybe you can help me with something else." Balus, happy to have earned more silver for drink, replied. Balus, sure, after I deal with the ghoul business, said in a conspiratorial way, laughing, "Captain, so this wretch isn't to blame for Mariwara?" "Balus, I don't think so. All he had on him were the stolen things, and this knife with a dull blade. I'm afraid you can't do much with him, except hang him or keep him tied." "Captain." "Good. I'll send word to Duras. And the priest, they promised Zalmoxe would curse me if I don't solve the crime." Balus laughs. "What fables did they tell you?" "Captain, that the ghoul is no joke. Iron isn't enough to kill a cursed thing, but at least it's enough for this wretch you brought." Balus nodded in salute and turned back. The pouch of silver hung heavy at his belt, with fuller pockets and his mind already on what came next. He set off toward the temple. Perhaps there he'd find something about the treasure or the cursed crypt. The temple archives. Balus stepped into the temple, and the air changed at once. The smell of burned incense, cold stone, and old parchment hit him instantly. Light filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows on the stone floor, like forgotten signs from the gods. From the side appeared a servant girl. She was young, very attractive, with her hair tied simply and modest attire that did nothing to hide her curves. She looked at him for a moment, assessing him, then bowed her head slightly. "Servant girl, the priest told me to take you to him immediately when you arrive." Balus felt a short thrill of pride. In an unexpectedly short time, he had become an important person in the village. People needed him. It felt good. Too good, perhaps. He followed the girl down a long corridor to a massive, dark wooden door. It opened, and the priest greeted him like one of the royal guard, with rigid, calculated politeness. "Priest." "So?" Balus stood straight, hands behind his back. "Balus, I found the wretch digging among the dead, but you'll have to wait until he wakes up. Maybe then we can get some detail about the crime from him." The priest nodded slowly. "Priest, good. At least the scum is caught." Balus looked at him closely, then continued in a deliberately neutral tone. "Balus, I know nothing about ghouls, superstitions, or other kinds of filth. It might be useful to learn. The temple archive could tell a lot." The priest narrowed his eyes. "Priest, you don't seem to believe in Zalmoxe's mysteries." "Balus, a good investigation means checking every lead, even the improbable ones." "Priest, seems you've done this before." Balus shrugged. "Balus, yes. Usually a wench tells me, Her man is cheating. Not that he's been killed by some devil's filth. Maybe we won't find anything about Zalmoxe's secrets, but maybe we learn why the killer left a symbol. The priest studied him for a few moments, then made a short gesture with his hand. Priest, sure. He turned to the door. Priest, girl, take the stranger to the archive. The servant girl entered at once and signaled Balus to follow. He inclined his head to the priest in a gesture of gratitude, then left. The archive hit him full force, shelves to the ceiling, thick volumes, parchments bound in leather, the smell of old ink and sacred dust. Balus stopped, for the first time in his life, genuinely impressed. Balus, it's a lot. The servant girl smiled. Balus looked like a child seeing the legends and history of the Dacians gathered in one place for the first time. Servant girl, tell me what you're looking for, and I'll guide you. She led him among the shelves, briefly explaining the archive's structure, then stopped in a modest, almost forgotten section. Servant girl, here is the section on the cursed and the unclean. It was the poorest part of the archive. A few thin volumes, others worn by time. Still, further on were some tomes about the dead and secrets of the world beyond. Balus nodded, satisfied. Balus, thank you. Then curiously he added, Balus, tell me, this temple. It seems older than the village. The servant girl blinked, slightly puzzled. Servant girl, even children know that. Balus grinned faintly. Balus, I grew up as a warrior of Zalmoxe. I didn't have time to worship at altars. Understanding appeared on the servant girl's face. Servant girl. Then it's natural. The servant girl began explaining more about the temple's age, about layers built over other layers, about its connection to ancient priests, and things no longer spoken of openly. When she finished, Balus pulled out 5 silver and handed them to her. Balus, for the information. The servant girl hesitated a moment, then accepted. She bowed her head respectfully. Servant girl, I have other duties for the temple, but if you need more help, I'm always available. She walked away quietly, leaving him alone among books, shadows, and ancient truths. Balus stood still for a moment, then reached for the first volume on the cursed. He had work to do. Deep in the archives, Balus delved deeper into the archive, far from the faint light in the corridors. Here the air was heavy, dusty, laden with years and lies. The shelves rose almost to the ceiling, filled with thick volumes bound in cracked leather. Titles barely visible, scratched by hands dead for centuries. He pulled a tome at random, opened it. The first pages were a string of prayers, invocations, and praises to Zalmoxe. He skipped them without regret. He was looking for something concrete. He reached the chapter on the dead who rise. The author, one Marinescu II, wrote with annoying certainty that any body risen from the grave was the work of the unclean one. Sent to test the faith of the living, Dacians were obliged to fast, pray to Zalmoxe, and submit to priests if they wished to escape the unclean one's wrath. Balus clenched his jaw, imagining the author writing calmly, belly full, while others were torn apart by things crawling from graves. A handful of ink and a lot of fear sold as truth. He closed the book with a sharp snap and moved to the next manuscript. The next volume was signed by one Andre. The manuscript's tone was different, but the priest's conclusion was equally absurd. This time it wasn't the unclean one to blame, but people's sins. Drunkenness, fornication, greed. The dead rose at Zalmoxe's command to punish the settlement. Balus snorted shortly. Priests were full of themselves, greedy and stupid. He cursed under his breath all the gods mentioned in the pages, in a heap without discrimination. If any were listening, let them hear clearly what he thought of them. He tossed that book aside too. A few volumes later, he found the same superstitions and unfounded speculations. Priests foamed abstractions about spirits, curses, angry gods, and not a word about mechanisms, clear signs, what to do when prayer doesn't take the place of a sword. He ran his palm over his neck, tired. His eyes hurt. He needed wine. Dacians weren't made to read this much. Eyes were good for spotting movement in battle and beautiful wenches. Like the servant from earlier, when he was about to give up, he came across a thinner, older volume, untitled on the spine. The pages were yellowed, the writing simpler, more direct, without sermons, like a strategy manual. On the first page, about talismans, he began reading more carefully. In one passage, the anonymous author described a protection talisman against shadows and those awakened from the dead. The materials were clear, almost banal, pure metal, a strand of hair, blood mixed with sacred ash. He noted that silver seemed the only effective one. Balus paused reading after discovering the sacred ash came from burning oak in holy flame, whatever that meant. More importantly, he learned it was kept in the temple's urns, in the crypt of sacred objects. He began cursing the authors in his mind again, and headed for the sacred chamber after checking no temple servant was following him. The chamber of sacred objects was smaller than Balus expected. No ostentation, no visible gold, or the opulence priests were known for. He saw only low shelves, stone urns, old wooden boxes sealed with cracked wax. The air smelled different here, not incense, but stale smoke and burned wood. He began searching methodically. He opened boxes, lifted heavy lids, moved objects with unusual care for him. Inside, he found old amulets, carved bones, metal fragments, inscribed with Dacian symbols, but nothing he sought. No trace of a disc with Zalmoxe's sign. Someone had probably stolen it. Instead, in a stone urn, he recognized the ash, sacred ash. The archive texts described it clearly, fine, greyish, almost silvery in faint light. Balus took a small amount, enough for a talisman. It wasn't his first theft, but this time he left 5 silver beside the urn. Not from scruples. The texts were clear. Sacred objects, taken without exchange, brought bad luck and the gods' wrath. And Balus wasn't a man who took unnecessary risks. He preferred not to have the gods angry, no matter how little he cared for them. When finished, he closed everything exactly as it had been. He returned to the archive, put the volumes back, then raised his voice. Balus, "Hey, a servant, help!" The servant girl appeared after a few minutes and led him to the exit. On the temple steps as he left, Balus noticed a very attractive red-haired girl with an intense gaze who passed him without a word and entered the temple. Her look lingered on him a fraction too long. "Servant girl, if the priest has messages for you, can I find you at the tavern?" Balus nodded shortly. It was nearly evening when he stepped out. The sky coloured a dirty orange. His thoughts had already fled to the treasure, to the fact that the wretch caught probably wouldn't die, though it would be great bad luck if he did. The whole treasure would be his alone. He entered the tavern hungry and immediately ordered wine and roast. Wine could help him clear his thoughts. Dacian treasure was more important than a ghoul or a sick killer, that was certain. Vaelis's awakening and the wise man's payment. Vaelisa woke only toward noon, torn from sleep not by light, but by that strange, persistent call coming from the cursed book. Its power pulled her from dreams like a cold hand on her wrist. She rose slowly, head heavy. The pain was gone, but the horror was not. The memory of the undead thing from the night before returned suddenly, sharp. The legends she'd read said nothing about the smell, nothing about that heavy, sweetish, rotten stench that clung to the throat and wouldn't leave. She could still feel it in her nostrils, as if the creature were there, hidden in the corner of the room. Something else caught her attention now, more immediate and human. Hunger. Her stomach twisted painfully. She had nothing left to eat, not even a crust of bread, and worse, no silver left. Since Mariwara had driven her out, Zalmoxe cursed her, the coins stuck to her poorly. Then she remembered the wise man owed her a pile of silver for the work in the library. She dressed quickly without much care and stepped out into the alley, hurrying toward the library. Inside, everything was as always. The old man sat at his table, hunched over his personal chronicle, writing the same endless comments with cheap ink and infinite patience. Nothing changed his routine. Not the death in the village, not the rumors, not the ghouls. Vaelisa. Old man, good day. The old man startled, nearly spilling the inkwell. Wise man, gods take me. Look what today brought. I thought you'd left this village. Vaelisa. Not yet. You still owe me. He grimaced, but didn't protest. He knew she was right. He opened the pouch, rummaged a moment, and handed her 10 silver, as if parting with his own child. Vaelisa looked at them, then at him, with a cold, sharp gaze. Fury rose in her chest at once, and for a moment she seemed ready to grab him by the collar. The old man sighed and pulled out another 10 silver, handing them over faster out of fear. Wise man, I swear that's all I have, until Duras comes with payment. Vaelisa smiled. The silver sounded good in her palm. Hunger already seemed more bearable. Her tone changed instantly, becoming playful, almost ironic. Vaelisa, and found anything interesting in those dusty chronicles? Wise man, no, nothing worth mentioning. He paused, though, for a moment, then continued as if the words had slipped. Wise man, but yesterday a beast of a man passed through here, in battle-worn armor. I haven't seen the like except in legends. Vaelisa raised an eyebrow. Vaelisa, and what did he want? Wise man, he was interested in the village history, and who killed Mariwara. Zalmoxe receiver. Interesting. Vaelisa, very interesting. We'll talk more when I return to work. She wanted to ask more questions. Curiosity was an old disease for her, but her stomach growled shamelessly, and now she had enough silver to silence it. Vaelisa's meal and reflections. She stopped at the tavern at the end of the alley and ordered something cheap, a thin stew and a piece of old bread. She didn't know how long those silver coins would last, and she wasn't the type to waste them. She ate quickly, with mechanical movements, while her gaze kept sliding around the room, more from habit than fear. The tavern was drowned in thicky smoke and cheap incense, and the smell of sour wine clung to the beams like an old disease. At the tables, the villagers spoke in whispers or not at all. It wasn't an evening for song. No one laughed heartily, no one played dice. Mariwara's death hung over them like a dirty shroud, unseen but felt by all. A few gazes lifted now and then fell back into their mugs. People feared what was coming more than what had been. Instinctively, she touched the talisman. She felt it cold under her fingers, but present. The same object that just one night before had kept her alive. The thought gave her a drop of peace. She leaned back, letting the bench creak under her weight. Then, without wanting to, her thoughts took her back to the temple. Life as a servant hadn't been hard. The work was clean, almost comfortable. She only had to wash, sweep, carry water, light candles, and that occasionally, always letting other servants do all the work. She had to be polite, listen to people's petty complaints, nod when needed, and utter now and then the right formula. Praise be Zalmoxe. It didn't matter if you said it from faith or habit. No one made the difference. The priest took care of the rest, but the temple wasn't a place of peace, as the villagers saw it. There were too many servants and too watchful. Some were just nosy, hungry for gossip and petty secrets. Others listened with purpose, for the priest, for Duras, or anyone with power or silver to buy loyalty. In the temple, no one spoke without someone hearing. Even silences were noted. And yet, the temple had something you couldn't find anywhere else. The archives. Old scrolls, tied with worn string, heavy books with cracked leather covers, manuscripts that smelled of mold, smoke, and incense. In them was the village history, forgotten rituals and legends people knew only from whispers. There had been her true work, not in front of people, but behind the shelves. Reading had always been her temptation, and a few times she'd been caught by the older, superstitious servants. She wasn't punished, since they had no authority, but she was warned. She was told she lacked the necessary preparation, that sacred texts could drive weak minds mad, that only priests knew how to separate symbol from truth. Cold smiles, low voices, hands clasped in guiding gesture, threats without being named as such. She had been told she lacked the necessary preparation, that sacred texts could drive weak minds mad, and that only priests knew how to separate symbol from truth. Cold smiles, low voices, hands clasped in guiding gesture, threats without being named as such. She had submitted then, or at least it seemed so. Now, however, things had changed. Mariwara's death wasn't just a crime. The woman had been inconvenient to many. Strong in speech, sharp in mind, some called her skilled, others despicable. She wasn't loved by all, but she had been necessary to the village, and now she was gone, sent to Zalmoxe by a filth of the unclean one, and the whole village felt it. Not from pity, from fear. If Mariwara could be found empty of blood, with cursed symbols on her body, then anyone could follow. The neighbor, the brother, or the child. The unclean one didn't choose by sympathy, and the legends no longer seemed so distant. Felisa realized the people in the tavern weren't talking about Mariwara as a woman, but as a sign, a warning. Her death had made the village smaller, tighter, more suspicious. She rose slowly from the table. Hunger had passed, but unease remained. Outside, the sky was darkening, and the alley led straight to the temple steps. The sunset light colored the stone in a faded red, almost sick. But this time, she wasn't entering as a simple servant. She began climbing the temple steps when, in front of her, the man mentioned by the wise man descended from the temple alongside a servant girl she didn't know. Valisa's encounter at the temple servant girl. If the priest has messages for you, can I find you at the tavern? The beast of a man nodded shortly and continued on. She thought the wise man was just exaggerating as usual, but this time the description was accurate. If anyone in the village had a chance against a filth, it was probably him. If not, At least he might buy her the seconds needed to escape with her life. The young servant girl met her at the entrance, but she looked at her with suspicion, especially at that hour. "Servant girl." "It's late," the girl said. "What are you doing at the temple now?" Felisa kept her calm and smiled. "Felisa, forgive me, but I was sent by the wise man to inventory some texts." The servant girl blinked, then nodded. She didn't seem to suspect anything. She was led into the archive. The smell of parchment, dust, and old incense hit her immediately. Without wasting time, she went straight to the section on death. She flipped through the volumes carefully but impatiently. Her fingers slid over yellowed pages, over crooked lines written by different hands, some confident, others trembling. The texts were loaded with heavy words, convoluted formulas, and explanations that contradicted one another. Legends mixed with religious dogmas, histories rewritten too many times by too many mindless priests. Nothing was clear, nothing direct. About ghouls she found almost nothing, just allusions. The cursed Babadokia had more pertinent information. About curses, only vague phrases, thrown in to scare or soothe as needed. No information was new. Some authors blamed the unclean one, others people's sins, others the god's wrath. Each wrote what suited him. Each believed himself closer to truth than the one before. She cursed in her mind, fat priests trained to fill pages, not save lives. Only in a much older manuscript, hidden between two dusty chronicles, did she find something different. The language was simpler, harsher, no detours. It mentioned a ritual dedicated to Zalmoxe, one said to destroy any evil within 1,000 paces. But it wasn't a ritual for anyone. Only those with iron will could perform it. The text emphasized the same thing repeatedly. Spoken wrong, prepared wrong. The ritual not only failed, but turned Zalmoxe's wrath on the one who attempted it and their family. Felisa pursed her lips. Zalmoxe's disc appeared as the central piece. It was described as made of gold and silver, a circle representing the sun's power, order, and judgment. On the back of the disc, it said, was a rare metal capable of attracting other metals. That was the sign to distinguish a true disc from an imitation. Without it, the ritual was useless. Further down, in the margin, someone had noted an incantation, probably copied from an even older source. Great Zalmoxe, father of light and judgment, look upon this place and see the filth. Bind its shadow, break its will, and burn the unclean one's work, so the sun remains master over flesh and soul. The ritual required objects placed in precise order. The disc first, in a ceremonial silver bowl. Next sacred oil, then a wolf's blood and still warm heart. Finally, a branch broken from a lightning-struck tree, direct sign of Zalmoxe's wrath, which had to be lit, the fire consuming all that remained. It wasn't magic for the weak or wenches. Several legends referred to the same disc. In ancient times, Dacians had used it to cleanse the land of things not belonging to the living world. The empire hadn't risen on gentle ground. It was built in a region full of monsters, spirits, curses. Then the Order of Guardians had been formed. An order texts said existed for over 1,000 years. Felisa didn't know if the ritual would work, but she knew one thing. Without the disc, she saw no chance to escape the unclean one's curse. She raised her gaze. The archive was silent. No footsteps, no foreign breath. She rose slowly, heart in her throat. With a quick motion, she tore out the page with the ritual and folded it tight. hiding it in the inner pocket of her dress. Then she put the manuscript back, arranging the volumes carefully, as if no one had touched them. She slipped into the chamber of sacred objects and began searching. The lamps flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows on the walls. The shelves were loaded with ritual vessels, ceremonial knives, old urns, symbols that meant nothing to her. Several silver bowls, exactly as described. Carafes of sacred oil sealed, ceremonial garments, folded carefully, talisman after talisman, but no trace of the disc. She moved faster, searching behind objects, under shelves, nothing, just empty. Frustration tensed her shoulders. Fear returned, heavy, suffocating. The thought that the ghoul might return made her tremble. Without the disc, the ritual was just a pretty story. When she left the temple, night had fallen completely. The air was cold and shadows seemed longer than ever. The way home felt endless. Once home, she barricaded the door carefully, latched it, pushed furniture against it, checked the windows. Only then did she sit on the bed, clutching the talisman in her fist. Fear didn't leave her. Thoughts swirled endlessly, black and heavy, like birds of prey. In the end, exhaustion won. She fell asleep, with the talisman pressed to her chest, like a child unwilling to let go of the only thing protecting her from the dark. The ghoul's hunger and the garrison victim. He realized he was waking more often. Nights were no longer so long, and sleep no longer held him captive. The blood of the cursed ones he had savored was returning his power, drop by drop, like a smoldering fire catching life again. He had plans, he felt them, even if he could not yet speak or remember them. Fragments of will, remnants of a purpose older than the rot in his bones. Then memories began slipping into his mind like worms. Life from before, oaths, orders, a name, a guardian. One of them had brought him to this state. Not a demon, not a god, but a man serving something greater than life. He approached the village without haste. Sense guided him now. But among them, he sensed something different. A sweet smell, almost unreal, an irresistible call. A strange power drew him toward a low, poorly built structure, more an improvised prison than a proper building. At the same time, another force pulled him in a different direction, toward the woman who had called him back. He felt her alive, protected by powerful magic. But he could not leave now, not when prey was so close. He approached the opening and peered inside. He saw an almost comical scene, a weak, deformed cripple, worse than the rotten state he was in now. A laugh leaked from his chest, broken, wet, and sinister. He was only rotting flesh, animated by the unclean one's magic and his victim's blood. But that creature, that one was broken from before. The stench reached his mind, though he no longer had a nose. He sensed it differently, like the corpses of gothic scum. The sound betrayed his victim. It began to scream. The cripple screamed, a thin, hysterical voice. "Ghoul, help, let me go." He heard footsteps, then someone fleeing in terror. Probably the guard, but it didn't matter when he had a victim. With a burst of force, he smashed the wall. Stone crumbled, wood cracked, and he hurled himself inside, chuckling in a laugh no longer belonging to the world of men. The wretch managed only one more scream, short and torn, before being swallowed. This time, he didn't stop at blood. He tore flesh, bones, and organs. He needed more, to rebuild his body, to bind the pieces. He began remembering the rituals. He started with the heart, but just then, something stopped him. His hand began moving on its own, a wordless command, a will older than hunger. A power not his own forced him to draw again, in blood, the forbidden, cursed symbol of his master. Balus awakens to new chaos. Balus woke toward noon, torn from sleep by the bustle in the tavern. Voices, forced laughter, heavy footsteps. He cursed under his breath, rose and descended. Too many people, far too many for a village that still smelled of death. He sat at a table and ordered a carafe of wine. While waiting, his thoughts fled to the protection talisman. Maybe it was just superstition, maybe not. But a true warrior left nothing to chance. He defended against arrows, swords, hammers, maces, and when needed, pots thrown by nervous wenches. And now, it seemed, servants of the unclean one too. He had never believed in tales of ghouls, stories for children, and frightened wenches, but what he'd seen in this village no longer fit tales. He swore to himself it was the last time he let drink find his path through the Empire. He barely raised the cup to his lips when a woman approached, one he recognized after a second. "Forgive the interruption, master." "Balus, I forgive you, wench." He felt good that someone finally recognized his authority. In this wretched village, nothing but trouble here. "Sit." He poured wine into a cup for her. The woman hesitated a moment, then obeyed. It didn't seem wise to contradict him. "Balus, what do you want?" "Servant girl, the priest and Durres summon you at once to the garrison. They say it's urgent." Balus nodded, feigning interest, but his thoughts jumped straight to the treasure in the crypt. He downed the cup in one gulp, tossed silver on the table, took his hammer, and followed her. Maybe these fools knew something about Zalmoxe's disc. That was all he cared about, until leaving this cursed village. At the garrison, he was led to the back building, where the prison was. In front of the door, the captain, Durres, and the priest whispered. All had grim faces. Durres: "Balus, come here." "Balus, what's this? Did a good ox die?" Durres, grave: "No. The ghoul struck again, the thief. Any progress?" Balus: "Not really. I was waiting for word from you on what the wretch knew." Captain: "Enter and see. If not for the symbol, I'd say a mad bear went wild." Balus entered the cell, and the stench hit him like a hammer. He nearly fell, but held steady. The first thing he saw, even before fully stepping in, was the cursed symbol, scrawled in blood on the floor. The wall was dust and rubble, destroyed by inhuman force. He didn't understand how the two older men endured the smell, as if a scrawled goth shitting himself was more bearable. The cell was a cesspit. "Balus, where's the corpse?" "Captain, the gravediggers came and took what remained for burial. They stepped out again, suffocating from the stench. The servant girl who brought him had tried, out of curiosity, to enter and fainted. Now she was waking, ashamed." "Balus, any marks on him? What did you find?" "Captain, just this." He handed a ring. It was drained of blood and torn like a liana. Balus took the ring, so blacking it seemed to swallow light. He turned it and saw on the inside the same symbol as on the floor. "Balus, either the wretch was in on it, or he stole from the wrong one. Did you interrogate him?" "Captain, a little. He swore he didn't kill Mariwara and never stole from the living. After a few more convincing questions, he admitted stealing from the dead." Balus turned to the priest. "Balus, from scriptures, I know every temple had a disc with Zalmoxe's power." "True." The priest blinked, surprised. He hadn't expected the brute before him to read, let alone ask such a question. Priest: "Yes, it's true. But unfortunately, when we checked the sacred chamber, we found no disc. We searched the temple chronicles too. I believe it's no longer here. I've sent word to neighboring villages. Zalmoxe watch over us, and perhaps one will help with this plague." He paused a moment. "Priest, it's said Zalmoxe's disc, used correctly, can destroy any evil, but it hasn't been used in generations. We have no time to call the guardians. By the time they arrive, the ghoul will strike again. We must find a way to send it back to the unclean one." Balus cursed softly through his teeth. "Duras, what's wrong?" "Balus, without the disc, we're either unarmed or dealing with a professional." He still wasn't convinced it was a creature of the unclean one. He'd seen similar massacres among Goths, but without symbols. The men nodded. "Captain, I'll set the guards to scour the village for evidence." "Duras, not all. I can spare you only 2 for a day. The village won't survive without grain money or empty bellies." Captain clenched his fist. "Captain, cursed be the unclean one. Priests search the scriptures, maybe find something useful." "Priest, we have few volumes. Useful texts seem missing from this archive, but I'll try." Captain turned to Balus. "Captain, you stranger, continue the investigation. Maybe you see what escapes us." Balus nodded and left. He had 2 clear leads left in mind: Mariwara's stepdaughter and the house where the woman lived. Balus breaks into Mariwara's house. It wasn't hard to find the house. Questions asked to the right people and glares thrown at the wrong ones led him quickly to the right gate. The house was clean, almost like a dignitary from the capital lived there. He saw an old gate, but well maintained. Too well for a woman the village only spoke of in half whispers. Balus didn't waste time. With one shoulder and a short push, the gate gave way immediately. The door resisted a moment longer, but then shattered under a well-placed hammer blow. A few passers-by stopped, stunned, but no one dared say anything. The stranger in armor, with the hammer slung on his back, didn't look like the man to argue with or interrupt. Inside, the house surprised him. It was clean and airy, ordered almost obsessively, the floor scrubbed, tables wiped, things in their place. Nothing seemed rushed, nothing left to chance. Balus began rummaging methodically, drawers, chests, cupboards. Then he looked under the bed, under the table, in corners. In a small chest, he found a pouch of silver. He weighed it in his palm, took a healthy fistful, and stuffed it in his pocket. He didn't want to be accused of theft, but the old woman didn't need it anymore. And from his experience, you never turn down loot, not even from the dead, especially from the dead. After nearly half an hour, the conclusion was disappointing. Wench clothes, some good, others expensive, banal letters. Then chronicles of her business, grain, trades, debts. The old hag knew her trade. Notes on the garden, how to keep vegetables over winter, what plants withstand frost, what to cover before first snow. Moriwara was an organized woman, too organized. He gathered a few scribbles and older papers. He knew some wise men paid well for rare texts or new techniques, even if boring to him. Still, nothing explained her death. No ghoul mentions, no symbol. Dissatisfied, he stopped in the bedroom doorway. He looked around once more, this time with the eye of a man who knows something's missing. The cupboard by the bed had space for 5 shelves, but only 4. Balus clenched his jaw. He had neither time nor patience to search for hidden mechanisms, springs, or levers made by some craftsman with too much free time. He raised his hammer and struck. Wood exploded. Splinters, clothes, and other objects flew everywhere. The cupboard collapsed into a useless pile. He searched the mess, and under the debris found a plain black box that opened immediately with 2 hammer blows. Inside, almost ceremonially, lay Zalmoxe's disc, gold and silver, cold, heavy, with the back threaded by a strange metal that seemed to pull any other metal toward it. Balus cursed softly. Under the disc were love letters addressed to a priest. When he'd agreed to this contract, he hadn't intended to know the old hag so intimately. He grinned crookedly. Seems priests weren't just greedy. They were lustful too. He didn't understand how Zalmoxe tolerated these priests. After rummaging more through the box, he saw it, a black ring, identical to the one on the grave thief. He took it and turned it between his fingers. Same light-swallowing color. Same symbol. Now things were taking shape. Each victim had been chosen, targeted. He'd bet Ileana had one of these symbols hidden somewhere too. Someone was marking deaths with this symbol. A brotherhood of superstitious fools, a cult, or something much older and worse. He didn't know yet, but for the first time, he had something solid in this investigation. He started getting curious. Maybe he'd find another treasure hidden by Mariora somewhere. His mind was a knot of questions. Too many leads, too few answers. So he did what he'd done all his life when things got too tangled.
He took the disc, the ring, and Mariora's writings, hid them well, and left the house.
The real answers waited where he'd always found them, at the tavern with a carafe of wine. Lisa's visit from Geta and the broken house bum, bum, bum. The knocks on the door tore her from sleep like a knife. "Open, wench," resounded the voice from outside. Lisa muttered a curse and rose dazed. It was already noon. She'd slept too much again. What does Geta want now? She was the only one who still visited, but she was starting to give her grey hairs. She quickly threw a dress over herself, arranged her hair in haste, and opened. Geta entered, almost pushing the door. Geta, good gods, the unclean one has made a den in your house, girl. I told you to clean up a bit. She looked around, disapproving. If you'd spend more time in the kitchen, and less with those cursed books, maybe you'd find a lad too. Valisa, what good news brings you here? Geta. Valisa interrupted, dryly. Geta handed her a bag. Geta, I brought you food. I know you're poor, and the pot isn't your friend. Valisa, annoyed, snatched the bag from her hand and began setting the table. She had no mood for sermons, but hunger forgave no one. They ate in silence for a few moments, until Geta wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and said, in a tone that admitted no reply, "Geta, we have to go to Mariwara." Valisa froze. Valisa, now? Geta, yes, now. What's wrong with you? Don't you know the ancient customs? Valisa gritted her teeth. The last thing she wanted was more dealings with corpses. Valisa, fine. Geta, and put something nice on, Geta added. Don't come in those gothic whore rags. After returning from the cemetery, they passed by Mariwara's house. Both stopped abruptly when they saw the gate broken and the door in pieces, as if a furious bull had escaped through the village. Not the first time. Geta, she hasn't even been dead a day, Geta murmured, voice trembling. And the village vultures have already defiled her house. I knew they were scum and hated her, but I didn't think they'd dare anger the gods like this. Zalmoxe give them wisdom. Valisa, let's see what they stole. Inside was disaster. Clothes thrown, furniture broken, drawers pulled out. As if a storm with human hands had passed through the house. Geta burst into tears. Valisa, however, moved carefully. She noticed immediately that some things had been left untouched. She found Mariwara's business chronicles, arranged almost as before. She gathered them and stuffed them in a bag found on the floor. Then she saw the black box. She picked it up, curiously, inspected it, then opened it. Inside were letters, love letters, too intimate and too shameful, all addressed to a priest. Vailisa, Gaeta, she said softly. Did you know about these? Gaeta stopped crying, wiped her eyes and nodded. Gaeta, I told her to stop. What she was doing with that married priest, it angered Zalmoxe. I told her, girl, the gods don't forgive sin. She made the protective sign. Gaeta, Zalmoxe, forgive her. Vailisa felt her stomach tighten. A bitter shame gripped her. If I hadn't cursed her, maybe Mariwara would still be alive. Gaeta, I have to go, Gaeta said suddenly. Take care of yourself, girl. Zalmoxe keep you safe.
She hugged her briefly and left. Then Vailisa remained alone. Night was approaching. She felt it in the air. She knew the ghoul would come again. Or at least she thought so. The talisman had protected her one night. But how long would it hold? The texts weren't clear. She'd been surprised it worked. But perhaps the stranger in the village could protect her. Or at least dangerous enough to distract the ghoul. She remembered something. Mariwara always had silver hidden around the house. She was skilled at business, paranoid, and careful. It didn't take long to find a well-hidden pouch with 50 silver. She took it without hesitation. The dead no longer needed money, and she needed to live. Vailisa enters the tavern. It was already evening when Vailisa entered the tavern. The noise of voices was heavier than usual. People were drinking a lot these days. Fear dried the throat worse than dust. She looked around the tavern, but it didn't take long to find him. The stranger occupied a large table alone, like a rock thrown in the middle of the room. The beast of a man had his hammer leaning against the bench. In front of him, 2 carafes of wine. He was the kind of man you couldn't miss even if you tried. Vailisa chose a smaller table, a little further away, and observed him for a while. She watched him drink, how he cast his gaze over the tavern without interest, how he seemed not to care about anyone. Meanwhile, he finished the first carafe. She gathered her courage, stood, and sat at his table just as he was pouring from the second. The stranger didn't even notice her and raised the cup to his mouth, calm. Vailisa waited, let him finish the glass. But instead of saying something, he poured another. Frustrated, she pierced him with a cold stare. Balus sensed the danger instantly. He raised his eyes and saw her. Red-haired green eyes, knife-like gaze, breasts like melons. Balus, what do you want, wench? He grumbled. Can't you see I'm busy? Vailisa, very, she replied dryly. No wonder the ghoul roams free through the village while you get drunk here like a pig. Balus burst into a short, thick laugh. He finished the glass. Balus, come on, say what you want and leave. Vailisa, I've come to hire you. Balus, oh! He leaned his elbows on the table. And why should I protect you? Wenches attacking because I stole their man for silver? Old hags' curses? Or clean clothes? Vailisa smiled crookedly. Vailisa, from a ghoul! The laugh stopped abruptly. Balus set the cup down. Balus, and what do you know about ghouls? Vailisa, I know I'll be the next victim if someone doesn't protect me. Balus measured her from head to toe. Calm, calculated. Balus, fine, but it'll cost you. What makes you think you're next? Are you a seer? Vailisa, I'm Mariwara's daughter. Balus understood immediately. Vailisa reached into her pocket and pulled out 20 silver, placing them on the table. Vailisa, that's all I have now. Balus looked at them, then poured wine. Balus, with these, I can't even fill my glass. Vailisa, please. Her voice trembled for the first time. Don't let the ghoul kill me. Balus had already decided to help her, but it was too good a moment to learn more, and maybe squeeze some extra silver out of her. Balus, if I start weaving fences like a wench, I make more money. Vailisa looked at him as if she wanted to strangle him. That gaze, he'd seen it before, in a forgotten village before killing 4 stupid Goths. Without a word, she pulled out the remaining 45 silver and placed them on the table. Vailisa, it's all I have. Balus stood, tossed 5 more silver on the table for the drink, and took a step to leave. Vailisa felt her cheeks burn with fury and humiliation. She stood too, lost. Vailisa, so, that's it. You leave me here to die like a stuck pig. Balus, what are you waiting for? He said without turning. Want us to bring the ghoul here, among all these people? Or to the temple? Are you mad? She blinked, confused. Vailisa, what? Balus, where do you live? He glanced over his shoulder. Or do we go to Mariwara's? Vailisa thought a moment. Her house was a ruin. Mariwara's had thick stone, solid walls, and seemed easier to defend from an uninvited intruder. Vailisa, Mariwara's. Vailisa quickly gathered the silver in a quick motion and left with Balus. Once there, Balus didn't waste time, searching for things to barricade the door. Perhaps he should have been gentler the first time he entered. Balus, I can't believe it, Vailisa murmured. She hasn't even been dead a day. Balus nailed the last board. Balus, true. People show their true face when you can't see them anymore. Mariwara's house was silent. Too silent. The freshly barricaded door didn't inspire confidence in Vailisa. Perhaps the man only knew how to drink. The air hung with the smell of broken wood, wine, and old fear. Vailisa sat on a chair by the table, back straight, as if posture could keep the darkness at bay. Balus rummaged through the mess he'd left earlier. He moved a chest, overturned a bench, then found 2 chipped glasses. Balus, got any wine? Vailisa stared at him long, disgusted. Vailisa, seriously, now? That's how you protect me? Balus shrugged, calm. Balus, if we're going to die, might as well be happy. His logic annoyed her, and at the same time calmed her. Time had to be killed somehow. The ghoul might not attack tonight. She stood, went to the floor in the corner, pulled a loosely fixed board, and took out a hidden carafe of wine, pouring into the glasses. Balus watched her more closely now. His gaze stopped at the chain around her neck. Balus, the old hag was rich, from what I see. Bought you the little chain from garbage diggers? Vailisa instinctively touched her chest. Vailisa? No. This is a talisman. Magic. I'd make you one too, but I have no ash left. Balus narrowed his eyes. Balus, magic, you say? Know the incantation? Without another word, he pulled a small pouch and placed it on the table. The ash was clearly visible. Greyish. Fine. Balus, I have some. The temple folks were very generous. A bit little, for how much I've helped them. Vailisa froze for a moment. Then she got to work. She took an old string, a small object that had belonged to Mariwara, the ash, and a needle. She pricked her finger without hesitation. Blood mixed with the ash. She added a strand of hair. Balus watched everything without saying a word. When she finished, he pulled a silver coin, placed it on the table, pierced it with his knife, and held it with a precise hammer blow, then handed it to her. Vailisa took it, and this time slowed her movements. More careful, more theatrical. She wanted to impress him. She cleared her throat and spoke. Vailisa, Zalmoxe, who sees and judges, let the shadow not touch the flesh. Let the enemies perish in your light. Silence. Nothing happened. Balus raised an eyebrow. Balus, that's it? I thought Zalmoxe would descend from the heavens and give you a kiss. Vailisa laughed shortly. Vailisa, that's the ritual. Balus put the talisman around his neck. He poured wine until the carafe was empty. Both drank in silence. Silence settled heavy. Vailisa grew more and more uneasy. The thought sprouted. Perhaps she'd been wrong. Perhaps she'd brought another victim into this house. Perhaps she should let the ghoul finish it. Let the nightmare end. She couldn't live like this. Midnight passed, and nothing happened. Balus, seems the ghoul's avoiding you. Vailisa ignored him and grimaced. Balus looked at her more closely. Balus, tell me, wench, what's eating you? Vailisa turned to him, irritated, almost challenging. Vailisa, the curse can be broken only through the blessing of a servant of light, or through the repentance of the one who uttered it. But the gods demand balance, and often, the one seeking deliverance pays with their own blood. Balus snorted. Balus, let me guess. Some Zalmoxe's servant scammed you with that poem, written drunk. How much did he charge? Vailisa burst into laughter. A bitter but sincere laugh. Vailisa, you're impossible. But at least, you don't lie. Moriawara's house was silent. Too silent. The ghoul's final assault hunger woke him again. It wasn't the first time that night, but this time he had no patience. He was ready to finish what he had started and surrender to eternal sleep. He only needed to find the cursed one who had awakened him from death. The call pulled him through the village, almost to the house of the second victim. Curious, the stone house in the middle of the village was lit. Lamps burned full of oil. He approached without noise, like a shadow. Through the window he saw two silhouettes, the redhead and someone else. Good. He would feast tonight. He shattered the glass and entered. He didn't know if he could break the stone wall. The ball man rose, instantly from the table, almost without thinking. The hammer was already in his hand. He grabbed the woman and pushed her behind him. Balus, make room and hide! Vailisa fled and hid behind a cupboard, trembling, eyes fixed on the creature in the room. The talisman began to glow. The ghoul raised its massive body, bare fangs, and let out a tearing howl. It smiled, or something that resembled a smile for a corpse. The beast had amazing speed, but Balus was prepared. The hammer blow struck the ghoul directly in the chest. Bones cracked, and the beast howled in pain and fell, but rose almost instantly and attacked again, more ferociously. Balus dodged, delivered a brutal punch. The ghoul's jaw detached and fell to the floor with a dry sound. It tried to howl in pain, but only horrible sounds came out instead. Too close, the ghoul threw itself on him. They both fell and began rolling on the floor. Balus was thankful to his instructors for making him learn hand-to-hand combat. The unclean one's beast was strong, but the loss of the body worked the same for it. Balus's talisman at his neck flared suddenly, but in the struggle the chain broke, and the object flew into a corner of the room. His protection was gone, but not before burning the ghoul. Balus took several blows, but the armor kept him alive long enough to push the monster off and stand. Until now, no one had ever hurt him in this form. This man had hurt him. The ghoul felt fury. He would make him suffer, devour him alive. The next blow sent Balus into the wall. The ghoul leapt over him and began smashing the armor until the metal gave way. A claw pierced his shoulder and pinned him to the wall, lifting him in the air. If it had a jaw, it probably would have smiled, but it prepared to kill him, thinking the fight would be more amusing. Balus did not tremble before death, nor before the filth in front of him. He didn't want to meet Zalmoxe, or the unclean one in the afterlife, with shame. The pain was unbearable. With his last strength, with his free hand, he drew the black knife. With a short, precise, and full of Dacian force motion, he cut the ghoul's arm. The creature tried to scream, but could not. Another deep cut in the chest. From the wounds gushed black blood, mixed with dark mist. The cursed priests had forgotten to mention this creature's stench. The final blow came quickly. The knife entered where the jaw should have been and sank deep into the brain. The ghoul stopped. For Balus, it seemed he could now control it like a puppet, and it began burning with a smouldering black flame. He pulled the knife from it and inspected it. He didn't know what to believe. He hadn't expected to live. After a few seconds, the body fell heavily to the floor, leaving behind a macabre pool of black blood. Balus fell to his knees too, gasping, amazed he still breathed. Violisa approached slowly, as if nearing a phantom. Violisa. You're alive? Balus. Barely. Wine. Violisa froze a moment, then remembered. She took another carafe of wine from where Mariora hid them, found a glass among the shards and handed it to him. Balus began drinking greedily, bleeding everywhere, not knowing what else to do. Violisa tore rags from Mariora's clothes and began bandaging him. She'd once read a manuscript about treating the body, but reality was too much for her. Balus made no sound, no groan. Around them, the place where the ghoul died was still blackened, burnt. Violisa was surprised. After nearly an hour, Balus was bandaged and no longer bleeding heavily. She helped him sit on the bed. Wine continued to flow, much wine. Too much for a man who should have been dead. Outside, villagers' voices began to be heard, but they couldn't understand what they said, speculating about the horror inside and probably how it was the next victim of the cursed undead. Fortunately for her, Balus had been here. People gathered in front of the house. The bravest peered inside, expecting a massacre. Instead, they saw her, Balus, and the body of a dead ghoul. Violisa began feeling guilty. Now she was responsible for what happened to Balus too. Another victim of her curiosity.